There is a moment in Revenge of the Sith where Anakin Skywalker stands in the Jedi Council chamber, alone, and the camera holds on his face as the sun sets over Coruscant. The room is empty. The chairs are empty. The order that raised him, trained him, and failed him is about to end, and he is about to be the one who ends it. But in that moment, before any of it happens, he is just a man standing in a room full of ghosts that have not died yet, the most powerful Jedi who ever lived, and the one who will destroy them all. This is not a list, not really. What this is a map. A map of power, yes, but also a map of what the Jedi Order valued, what it ignored, what it rewarded, and what it punished. Because when you rank every Jedi by power, what you are actually doing is telling the story of an institution that spent 1,000 years training people to wield the most extraordinary force in the galaxy, and then acted surprised when that force became uncontrollable. The ranking tells you something, but the gaps between the rankings tell you more. Welcome to Twin Suns. Get comfortable, settle in, turn the lights down low. This one is going to take a while. We are going to work through every significant Jedi the canon has given us, from the ones who barely register on the scale, to the ones who bent the Force itself to their will. And if you have not subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these long, quiet, deep dives into the galaxy far, far away. Hit that button. Settle in. Let us get into it. We are going to start at the bottom of the ranking. Not because these Jedi do not matter. They do. But because understanding where the floor is helps you appreciate just how high the ceiling goes. And the floor, in the Jedi Order, is still remarkably high. These are people who can move objects with their minds, who can sense danger before it arrives, who can wield a blade of pure energy with precision that most beings in the galaxy cannot even comprehend. The weakest Jedi on this list is still one of the most extraordinary individuals in galactic history. Remember that as we go. The scale we are working with is not human. It is something else entirely. Let us begin with a Jedi who most people remember for a single, unfortunate moment. Coleman Trebor. If you do not recognize the name, you will recognize the scene. Attack of the Clones. The Battle of Geonosis. The arena is chaos. Jedi are igniting lightsabers. Battle droids are pouring in. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a tall, dinosaur-like Jedi Master charges up the balcony toward Count Dooku. He gets there. He raises his lightsaber. And Jango Fett shoots him twice. And he falls off the balcony to his death. That is it. That is the entire on-screen career of Coleman Trebor. 2 blaster bolts and a long fall. But here is the thing that people forget. Coleman Trebor was a member of the Jedi High Council. That is not a position they hand out to average Force users. The Council, during the final years of the Republic, consisted of 12 of the most accomplished Jedi in the galaxy. Trebor earned his seat. He was a Jedi Master. He had decades of experience, diplomatic missions, combat engagements, and a deep enough connection to the Force to be considered one of the Order's leaders. And he died in 3 seconds to a bounty hunter with a jetpack. That death tells you something important about power. Not about Trebor specifically, but about what power means in the Star Wars galaxy. A Jedi Council member, a master with decades of training, can be killed by a well-placed blaster bolt. The Force does not make you invincible. It does not make you bulletproof. It makes you extraordinary. But extraordinary is not the same as immortal. And the Jedi who forgot that distinction, the ones who started to believe that their power placed them above the basic vulnerabilities of the physical world, those are the ones who fell the hardest. Trebor is at the bottom of this ranking, not because he was weak, but because the canon gives us almost nothing to evaluate. He is a reminder that even Council-level Jedi can be brought down by something as simple as a blaster and bad timing. That is the floor. And it is already higher than most people in the galaxy will ever reach. Right beside Trebor, we need to talk about the Jedi who died even faster in the films. Agen Kolar and Saesee Tiin, 2 Jedi Masters, 2 members of the High Council, and both of them were cut down by Darth Sidious in the Chancellor's office in Revenge of the Sith in what might be the most humiliating display of Jedi combat in the entire saga. Mace Windu brought 4 Jedi to arrest the Chancellor: Kit Fisto, Agen Kolar, Saesee Tiin, and himself. And within the first few seconds of the fight, Sidious killed Kolar and Tiin almost instantly. They barely had time to raise their blades. Now, there is an argument to be made that this says more about Sidious than it does about them. And that argument has real merit. Darth Sidious is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most powerful Force users who has ever existed. His speed, his ferocity, his command of the dark side were so overwhelming that even experienced Jedi Masters could not process what was happening fast enough to defend themselves. But the fact remains: 2 council members, 2 lightsabers drawn, 2 deaths in seconds. The canon does not give Kolar or Tien any significant Force feats to offset that moment. They sit near the bottom of this ranking because the only moment the saga chose to define them was the moment of their defeat. And that brings us to someone who lasted just a little longer in that same fight: Kit Fisto, the Nautolan Jedi Master with the easy smile and the tentacle-like headtails who, in the films, seems almost designed to be liked. Kit Fisto gets a few more moments than Kolar or Tien. He survives a handful of exchanges with Sidious before falling. In Attack of the Clones, he is one of the Jedi in the Geonosis arena, and there is a brief shot of him grinning as he kicks a battle droid, and that single expression tells you everything about how the character was conceived. He enjoys the fight. There is a lightness to him that most Jedi do not have. But the Clone Wars animated series is where Kit Fisto actually gets to show what he can do. In Season 1, the episode Lair of Grievous, which aired on December 12, 2008, Kit Fisto tracks General Grievous to his lair on the 3rd moon of Vasek. What follows is one of the most revealing episodes in the entire series, not because of what it says about Fisto, but because of what it says about Grievous. Fisto discovers that Grievous has been modifying himself, upgrading his body, turning himself into a more efficient killing machine, and Fisto fights him. He holds his own. His Form 1, Shicho, technique is fluid and adaptable, and he manages to survive an encounter that kills his former Padawan, Nahdar Veb. The fact that Fisto walks away from Grievous's lair alive puts him above the Jedi who could not even survive 3 seconds against Sidious. But the fact that he could not stop Grievous, could not avenge his Padawan, and ultimately fell to Sidious himself, keeps him in the lower range of this ranking. Kit Fisto was a skilled swordsman, one of the finest duelists in the Order by some accounts. But being a fine duelist and being a powerful Jedi are not the same thing. Power, in the Force, is about more than how well you swing a lightsaber. It is about how deeply you connect to the energy that binds the galaxy together. And while Fisto's combat skills were undeniable, his demonstrated Force abilities in the canon remain relatively modest. Telekinesis, enhanced reflexes, the standard toolkit, nothing that separates him from the pack. He belongs in the lower tier, respected, competent, but not extraordinary. If you are settling in and enjoying this journey so far, a quick subscribe really does help the channel keep going. Now let us talk about a Jedi who the films barely acknowledge, but who the Clone Wars elevated into something genuinely compelling: Luminara Unduli. The Mirialan Jedi Master first appears in Attack of the Clones as part of the Geonosis arena battle. She is there. She fights. She survives. The films give you nothing else. But the Clone Wars series, which ran from 2008 to 2014 and then returned for a final season in 2020, reveals Luminara to be one of the most disciplined practitioners of Form 3, Soresu, the defensive lightsaber style that prioritizes endurance and patience over aggression. Luminara's power is not the flashy kind. She does not throw starships with the Force or generate lightning from her fingertips. Her strength is in her composure. In the Clone Wars episode Cloak of Darkness, Season 1, Episode 9, which aired on December 5, 2008, Luminara is tasked with guarding the captured Newt Gunray aboard a Republic cruiser. When Asajj Ventress infiltrates the ship to free Gunray, Luminara engages her in combat and holds her own. She fights with a quiet precision that contrasts sharply with Ventress's feral aggression, and she does something that most Jedi in the Clone Wars struggle to do. She remains calm. Not the forced calm of someone suppressing their emotions, but the genuine stillness of someone who has fully internalized the Jedi teachings about detachment. That calm is both her greatest strength and, arguably, her limitation. Luminara is so committed to the Jedi philosophy of non-attachment that when her Padawan, Barriss Offee, begins to radicalize, Luminara does not see it, cannot see it. Her faith in the Order's teachings is so complete that the idea of her own student turning against those teachings does not register as a possibility until it is too late. In Season 5, Barriss bombs the Jedi Temple hangar and frames Ahsoka Tano for the attack. Luminara's student, Luminara's failure. Not a failure of power, but a failure of perception. And in the Jedi Order, Those two things are more closely linked than most masters would like to admit. Luminara sits in the lower middle tier of this ranking. Solid, reliable, a Jedi Master in the fullest sense of the word, but her ceiling is defined by her orthodoxy. The Jedi who transcend the middle of this list are, almost without exception, the ones who pushed against the boundaries of what the Order said was possible. Luminara never pushed, she stayed inside the lines. And the lines, as history proved, were not enough. Let us move to Aayla Secura, the Twi'lek Jedi Knight who, like Luminara, gets most of her development not from the films but from the Clone Wars and from the comics that preceded it. In the films, Aayla Secura appears briefly in Attack of the Clones during the Geonosis battle, and then again in Revenge of the Sith, where she is gunned down by her own clone troopers on the planet Felucia during Order 66. Her death is one of the most haunting in the montage. She is walking through the jungle, her troops behind her, and they simply open fire. She turns, surprised, and falls. No lightsaber drawn, no force push, no defense. Just trust. Betrayed. In the Clone Wars, Aayla Secura is shown to be a proficient combatant with a strong connection to the living force. In Season 1, the Jedi Crash arc, episodes Jedi Crash and Defenders of Peace, which aired in January of 2009, Aayla is stranded on the planet Meridoon alongside Anakin Skywalker, Ahsoka Tano, and Commander Bly after their ship is destroyed. What is interesting about these episodes is not Ayla's combat prowess but her philosophy. She is the one who tells Ahsoka that a Jedi must be prepared to let go of everything, including the people they care about. It is a teaching that sounds noble in the abstract and devastating in practice. Aayla believed it, lived it, and then her own soldiers shot her in the back because she trusted them completely. Aayla Secura was an Ataru practitioner, favoring the acrobatic, aggressive fourth lightsaber form. She was agile, fast, and capable, but she was not on the level of the masters who sit above her on this list. Her force abilities, as shown in the canon, were solid but unremarkable. Telekinesis, enhanced senses, combat precognition, the baseline kit. She occupies the same tier as Luminara, maybe slightly below. A capable Jedi Knight who served the Republic faithfully and died for it without ever knowing why. Next to Aayla, we should place Barriss Offee. And yes, she belongs on this list, because before her fall, Barriss was a Jedi, a Padawan, under Luminara Unduli, trained in the ways of the Force, skilled enough to be entrusted with missions alongside some of the Order's best. In the Clone Wars, Barriss demonstrates competence with a lightsaber and a reasonable command of the Force. In the Season 2 episode, Brain Invaders, which aired on December 4, 2009, Barriss is possessed by Geonosian brainworms aboard a Republic medical frigate, and Ahsoka is forced to fight her. Even under the control of the parasites, Barriss is a formidable opponent, which suggests a baseline level of skill that should not be dismissed. But Barriss's real significance to this ranking is what she represents, rather than what she can do. Her bombing of the Jedi Temple hangar in Season 5, in the episode The Wrong Jedi, which aired on March 2, 2013, is not a display of force power. It is a display of conviction. She believed the Jedi had lost their way. She believed the Order had become an instrument of war rather than an instrument of peace. And she was right. She was absolutely right. The methods she chose were monstrous, but the diagnosis was accurate. The Jedi had become generals. They had become soldiers. They had stopped asking whether the war they were fighting was the right war to fight. Barriss saw it, and seeing it broke her. In terms of raw power, Barriss sits low on this list. She was a Padawan, never elevated to knight. Her force abilities were adequate but not exceptional. But I include her because a ranking of Jedi power that only measures force strength and combat skill is missing the point. Barriss understood something about the Order that most masters on the Council could not see. That is a different kind of power, and the Jedi paid for ignoring it. There is another Jedi who deserves mention in this tier, and she is one whose story was, for decades, barely a footnote until the canon decided to give her something remarkable. Yaddle, the other member of Yoda's species on the Jedi Council during the events of the Phantom Menace. For years, Yaddle was a curiosity, a face in the council chamber, a smaller, quieter version of Yoda, with auburn hair and a serene expression who sat in her chair and said nothing, and then disappeared from the council by the time of Attack of the Clones. The films offered no explanation for her departure. she was simply gone. The Tales of the Jedi animated anthology series, which premiered on Disney Plus on October 26, 2022, changed that. In the episode The Sith Lord, the fourth episode of the series, Yaddle discovers the truth about Count Dooku. She follows him. She watches him meet with Darth Sidious. She realizes that a member of the Jedi Order, a former Jedi Master, is conspiring with the Sith Lord who has been manipulating the Republic, and she does what any Jedi should do. She confronts him. The fight that follows is brief and devastating. Yaddle engages Dooku in lightsaber combat, and she is good, genuinely good. Her blade work is precise, her movement controlled, her connection to the Force evident in every stroke. But Dooku is better. He has the dark side behind him now, and the raw aggression of a fallen Jedi who is fully committed to his new path. He overpowers her. He kills her, and in doing so, he completes his transformation into Darth Tyrannus. Yaddle's death is the price of Dooku's apprenticeship. The Sith demanded a sacrifice, and Dooku gave them one of the Order's most venerable masters. What makes Yaddle significant to this ranking is not her combat performance in that final duel, but what the canon tells us about her abilities. Yaddle was known for mastering Morikro, an ancient and extraordinarily dangerous Force technique that allows its user to slow down the bodily functions of a target to the point of near death. It is, essentially, a Force ability that can put someone into a death-like trance. The Jedi Order considered it one of the most perilous techniques in their arsenal, because in unskilled hands it could easily become lethal. Yaddle mastered it. She also possessed the standard suite of Jedi abilities: telekinesis, enhanced senses, lightsaber combat, augmented by centuries of experience. She was of Yoda's species, which means she likely shared, to some degree, the natural Force sensitivity that makes that species among the most powerful in the galaxy. Yaddle sits in the lower middle tier of this ranking, alongside Luminara and Aayla Secura. Her demonstrated feats are limited by her minimal screen time, but her known abilities, particularly Morikro, and her position on the Jedi Council for decades, suggest a level of power that should not be dismissed. Her death at Dooku's hands is a mark against her, but Dooku was himself one of the finest duelists the Order ever produced, and falling to him is not the same as falling to a lesser opponent. Yaddle deserved better than the story gave her, but the story she got tells us enough to place her here, among the competent and the faithful, the Jedi who served without fanfare and died without recognition. Now we start to climb. The next tier of Jedi are the ones who were not just competent, but genuinely formidable. Masters who could change the outcome of a battle, who could stand against dark side users and survive, who possessed specific gifts that set them apart from the rank and file. And the first name in this tier is one that deserves far more attention than it typically gets: Plo Koon. Plo Koon is the Keldor Jedi Master, with the distinctive breathing mask and the quiet, steady presence that makes him one of the most beloved characters in the Clone Wars, despite relatively limited screen time in the films. In the prequel trilogy, he is a background figure, a face on the Council, a name without a story. But the Clone Wars changed that completely. In the early Season 1 episode Rising Malevolence, which aired on October 3, 2008, Plo Koon's fleet is ambushed by General Grievous's secret weapon, the Malevolence, a massive warship equipped with an ion cannon that disables entire fleets. Plo Koon's cruiser is destroyed, his crew is killed, and Plo Koon, floating in the wreckage of his ship with a handful of clone troopers, does something that tells you everything about who he is. He refuses to give up. He keeps his soldiers calm. He treats them not as expendable units, but as individuals whose lives matter. When one of the clones says that they are just clones, that they are meant to be expendable, Plo Koon responds with a line that, in the context of an animated show, carries an almost unbearable weight. He tells them that not to him. Not to him. That moment is not a display of Force power, but it is a display of the kind of power that the Jedi Order was supposed to embody, and so often failed to. Plo Koon sees the clones as people. He has always seen them as people. He was the one who discovered Ahsoka Tano as a child and brought her to the Jedi Temple. He was the one who maintained connections to the people he cared about, even when the Order frowned on attachment. He was a Jedi Master who practiced compassion not as an abstract ideal, but as a daily discipline. In terms of combat ability, Plo Koon was one of the finest pilots in the Jedi Order, rivaling even Anakin Skywalker in skill. His lightsaber technique was refined, and his Force abilities included telekinesis, enhanced senses, and a unique ability related to his Keldor physiology. In Legends continuity, Plo Koon was known for using electric judgment, a light-side variant of Force lightning, though this ability has not been explicitly confirmed in the current canon. What the canon does confirm is that Plo Koon was trusted with some of the most dangerous missions of the Clone Wars, that he served on the Council for decades, and that when Order 66 came, he was shot down by his own wingmen while flying over Cato-Neimoidia. His starfighter spiraled into a building, and he was gone. Plo Koon gave the galaxy one of its greatest heroes, and he never lived to see what she became. He was the one who traveled to the planet Sheely, identified the Force-sensitive Togruta child, and brought her to the Jedi Temple to begin her training. Without Plo Koon, there is no Ahsoka. Without Ahsoka, the trajectory of the entire saga changes. He was shot out of the sky by the clone troopers he trusted, and the galaxy lost a Jedi who deserved a better ending than the one he got. They all deserved better. But Plo Koon, with his quiet compassion and his breathing mask and his gentle insistence that clone troopers were people, he deserved better most of all. Plo Koon sits in the solid middle tier. Not the most powerful, not the most skilled with a blade, but one of the most complete Jedi the Order ever produced. A warrior, a pilot, a leader, and a person who treated every life as though it mattered. That completeness is its own kind of power. Right alongside Plo Koon, let us place Ki-adi-mundi, the Syrian Jedi Master with the elongated cranium who served on the Council during the final years of the Republic. Ki-adi-mundi is, in the films, primarily a voice of caution. He is the one who dismisses the possibility that the Sith could have returned without the Jedi knowing. He is the one who questions Qui-Gon Jinn's belief that Anakin is the chosen one. He is the voice of institutional skepticism, the Jedi who trusts the system so completely that he cannot imagine the system being wrong. In the Clone Wars, Ki-adi-mundi is shown to be a capable battlefield commander, leading clone troopers into combat on multiple fronts. In the Season 2 episode Landing at Point Rain, which aired on November 4, 2009, Ki-adi-mundi leads an assault on a Geonosian droid factory in what is essentially the Clone Wars version of D-Day. The episode is intense, brutal, and revealing. Ki-adi-mundi fights through waves of Geonosians and battle droids, demonstrating both combat skill and strategic thinking. His lightsaber work is efficient rather than elegant. He cuts through enemies with a directness that suggests decades of training applied to a single-minded purpose. Get through. Get to the objective. Survive. Ki-adi-mundi's Force abilities are not extensively showcased in the canon, but his position on the Council and his survival through years of the Clone Wars speak to a level of power that should not be underestimated. In the older Legends continuity, he was granted a unique exception by the Jedi Order, being allowed to marry and have children due to the low birth rate of his species. That detail, while not confirmed in the current canon, is interesting because it suggests the Council recognized something in Ki-adi-mundi that warranted bending their most fundamental rules. Whether that something was his power, his dedication, or simply the political pragmatism of the late Republic is left for the viewer to decide. He died during Order 66, on the planet Mygeeto. The scene in Revenge of the Sith shows him turning to face his clone troopers as they open fire. Unlike some of the other Jedi in the Order 66 montage, Ki-adi-mundi manages to deflect a few bolts before being overwhelmed. A few bolts, 2, maybe 3 seconds of additional survival. That is what decades on the Jedi Council bought him. A couple of extra seconds and the knowledge of what was happening before it ended. Ki-adi-mundi sits alongside Plo Koon in the middle tier. A solid Jedi Master, a competent warrior, a flawed thinker who trusted the wrong institutions, not powerful enough to change the course of the war, not perceptive enough to see the betrayal coming, but capable enough to earn his place among the Order's leadership for decades. That counts for something, even if it was not enough. And while we are here in the middle of the ranking, take a moment to breathe. We have come a long way already, and there is so much further to climb. Now let us talk about Shaak Ti, the Togruta Jedi Master who might be the most underserved character in the entire prequel era. Shaak Ti appears in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, but both films give her almost nothing to do. George Lucas filmed 2 separate death scenes for Shaak Ti in Revenge of the Sith, one where she is killed by General Grievous during the kidnapping of Chancellor Palpatine, and another where she is killed by Anakin Skywalker during the attack on the Jedi Temple. Neither scene made the final cut. She simply disappears from the film, her fate left ambiguous for years. The Clone Wars addressed this gap. In the series, Shaak Ti is stationed on Kamino, where she oversees the training of clone troopers. This might sound like a background role, but the show treats it as something far more significant. Shaak Ti is responsible for the quality and readiness of the Republic's entire military. Every clone trooper who fights in the war passes through her oversight. In the Season 3 episodes Clone Cadets and the Season 6 arc involving Clone Trooper 5s and the discovery of the inhibitor chips, Shaak Ti is a central figure. She is the Jedi who fights to protect the clones' individuality, who pushes back against the Kaminoans' cold utilitarianism, who sees the clone troopers as more than products on an assembly line. In the Season 6 episode Conspiracy, which aired on March 7, 2014, as part of the Netflix release of The Lost Missions, Clone Trooper 5s discovers the existence of the inhibitor chips that will eventually enable Order 66. Shaak Ti is involved in the investigation, though she is manipulated by Nala Se and the larger conspiracy that she cannot see. She comes tantalizingly close to uncovering the truth. If she had succeeded, if she had pushed just a little harder, the entire trajectory of the galaxy might have been different. But she trusted the system. She trusted the Republic. She trusted that the people she was working with were acting in good faith, and they were not. Shaak Ti was considered one of the most formidable female Jedi of the prequel era. By most accounts, her lightsaber technique drew on multiple forms, and her combat instincts were sharp enough to survive engagements that overwhelmed lesser Jedi. Her force abilities were considerable, and her strategic mind was keen enough to be entrusted with one of the Republic's most critical operations. There is a deeper irony to Shaak Ti's story that the canon does not spell out but cannot avoid implying. She was responsible for the clone army. She oversaw their training. She fought for their rights as individuals. And the clone army was the instrument of the Jedi Order's destruction. The soldiers she trained, the soldiers she cared about, the soldiers she spent years defending against the Kaminoans' utilitarian indifference. Those soldiers were programmed from birth to kill her, to kill all of them. Every Jedi who ever trusted a clone trooper, every master who ever called a clone by name instead of number, every knight who ever shared a foxhole with a soldier and believed they were fighting the same war for the same reasons. They were all betrayed, and the betrayal was built into the product. The clone army was a weapon pointed at the Jedi from the moment of its creation, and Shaak Ti, the woman responsible for its quality, never knew. She inspected the weapon that would kill her and found it satisfactory. That is not a failure of perception on Shaak Ti's part. Not really. The conspiracy was too vast, too well hidden, too deeply embedded in the machinery of the Republic for any single Jedi to uncover. Dooku commissioned the army. Sifo Dyas placed the order. Palpatine pulled the strings. The Kaminoans followed the contract. And the inhibitor chips, the tiny biological devices implanted in every clone's brain that would force them to execute Order 66, were concealed so effectively that even when Trooper 5s discovered the truth, the conspiracy closed around him and silenced him before the information could reach the Jedi Council. Shaak Ti was standing right there. She was involved in the investigation, and she was manipulated out of the answer by forces she could not see. That is the horror of her story. She was so close to saving everyone, and she was not quite close enough. She sits in the middle tier, slightly above Plo Koon and Ki-adi-mundi, because her demonstrated skill set is slightly broader and her tactical acumen slightly sharper. But like so many Jedi in this range, she was ultimately limited by the same blind spot that brought the whole order down. She could not see what was right in front of her because the institution she served told her it was not there. Let us talk about someone whose power is measured not in combat feats or force displays, but in knowledge. Jocasta Nu, the Jedi librarian, the keeper of the Jedi archives, the woman who told Obi-Wan Kenobi, with absolute confidence, that if a planet did not appear in the archives, then it did not exist. That line, from Attack of the Clones, has become something of a joke in the Star Wars community. The arrogance of it, the institutional blindness. A planet has been erased from the archives, and rather than considering the possibility that someone tampered with her records, Jocasta Nu declares the planet non-existent. But here is the thing about Jocasta Nu that the films do not tell you. In the canon comics, specifically the Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith series by Charles Soule, which ran from 2017 to 2018, Jocasta Nu survives Order 66 and returns to the Jedi Temple to retrieve a holocron containing a list of every Force-sensitive child in the galaxy. She knows that if the Empire gets that list, those children will be hunted, taken, turned into Inquisitors or worse. So she goes back, into the temple, into the heart of the enemy's power, and she fights. She fights Darth Vader himself. She does not win, of course. She cannot. No one at her power level could. But she destroys the holocron rather than letting it fall into Vader's hands. She ensures that the list of Force-sensitive children is lost, and in doing so, she saves an unknown number of lives across the galaxy. There is a moment in the comics where Jocasta Nu faces Vader directly, and she says something that stops him cold. She tells him who he is. She calls him by name, Anakin Skywalker. And in that moment, the mask cracks. Not physically, emotionally. Vader, the enforcer, the killer, the man who has spent months hunting every remnant of the Jedi, is confronted by a librarian who knows his name, who remembers him as a boy in the temple, who sees through the suit and the breathing apparatus and the red blade to the person underneath. It is a fleeting moment. Vader recovers. The mask goes back up. But Jocasta Nu, in her last moments, does something that very few people in the galaxy ever manage to do. She makes Darth Vader hesitate, not through force power, through knowledge, through the simple, devastating act of calling a monster by the name of the boy he used to be. Jocasta Nu was never the most powerful Jedi in terms of the Force. She was a librarian, a scholar, a keeper of knowledge. But her courage in that moment, her willingness to walk into certain death to protect the next generation, that puts her on this list. She sits near the bottom in terms of raw Force power. But she belongs here, and her presence reminds us that power is not always measured in how hard you can push. Sometimes it is measured by what you are willing to protect. And Jocasta Nu, in her final moments, protected everything. The future, the children, the hope that someday, somewhere, the Jedi would return. She died so that possibility could live, and the possibility lived. Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, Ezra Bridger, Cal Kestis. All of them survived because people like Jocasta Nu made sacrifices that history never recorded. She will never be ranked among the most powerful Jedi, but she should be ranked among the bravest. And bravery, in the Star Wars galaxy, is its own kind of force. Before we move further up the ranking, there is one more Jedi who belongs in this middle tier, and his story is one of the most complex and morally ambiguous in the entire canon. Quinlan Vos. Quinlan Vos is the Kefar Jedi Master, with the distinctive yellow facial tattoo and the wild, untamed energy that set him apart from virtually every other member of the Order. Where most Jedi radiated calm, Vos radiated chaos. Where most Jedi followed the code, Vos bent it, broke it, and reassembled it in ways that made the Council deeply uncomfortable. He was, in many ways, the Jedi that the Order deserved but did not want. A maverick, a rule breaker, a man who understood the darkness not because he read about it in the archives, but because he had touched it, tasted it, and walked back from its edge. Vos possessed a rare and potent Force ability called psychometry, the power to read the history of an object by touching it. He could pick up a blaster and see who had fired it, where, and at whom. He could touch a wall and feel the echoes of conversations that had taken place beside it. This made him one of the Jedi Order's most effective trackers and investigators, capable of unraveling mysteries that other Jedi could not even approach. Psychometry is not a combat power, but it is a power that requires an extraordinarily refined connection to the living Force, and Vos possessed it in abundance. His story takes its darkest turn in the novel Dark Disciple, written by Christie Golden and published on July 7, 2015. The novel was based on 8 unproduced episodes of the Clone Wars that were scripted but never animated, and it tells the story of Vos's mission to assassinate Count Dooku. The Jedi Council, in one of its most morally questionable decisions, assigns Vos to work with Asajj Ventress, Dooku's former apprentice, to get close enough to kill the Sith Lord. Ventress agrees to help, but her method of preparation involves teaching Vos to use the dark side. And Vos learns. He opens himself to the dark side of the Force. He lets anger fuel his strikes. He lets hatred sharpen his senses. And the dark side, predictably, takes hold. Vos falls, not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment, but gradually, like a man walking into deeper and deeper water, until he realizes He can no longer touch the bottom. He becomes Dooku's secret apprentice. He betrays the Jedi. He betrays Ventress. He becomes the thing he was sent to destroy. But here is the part that matters. He comes back. Vos finds his way out of the darkness, pulled back by his love for Ventress and by the remnants of the Jedi teachings that he never fully abandoned. In their final confrontation with Dooku, Vos fights alongside Ventress, and when Dooku unleashes Force lightning at them, Ventress throws herself in front of the blast to save Vos's life. She dies, and her death, the sacrifice of someone who was never a Jedi but who loved like one, is what finally breaks the dark side's hold on Quinlan Vos. Vos's power at his peak was considerable. His lightsaber skills were exceptional. His psychometry was unmatched. And when augmented by the dark side, he was capable of going toe-to-toe with Count Dooku in combat, a feat that only a handful of Jedi ever accomplished. But the dark side augmentation is not something this ranking rewards, because the cost of that augmentation is the corruption of everything a Jedi is supposed to be. Vos without the dark side is a strong Jedi master in the upper middle range. Vos with the dark side is something more powerful and far less. He sits in this tier. Talented, gifted, complicated. A Jedi who walked into the darkness and walked back out, scarred but alive, carrying the memory of a woman who died so he could remember who he was. Now we begin to enter the tier where the Jedi start to separate themselves from the pack. The ones whose Force abilities and combat skills are not just impressive but genuinely exceptional. And the first name here is one that the canon has been steadily building for years. Cal Kestis. Cal Kestis is the protagonist of the Jedi, Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor video games, and he occupies a fascinating position in the Star Wars timeline. He is an Order 66 survivor, a Padawan whose training was cut short when his master, Jaro Tapal, was killed by clone troopers during the Purge. Cal spent years in hiding, suppressing his connection to the Force, working as a scrapper on the planet Bracca, dismantling Republic warships for the Empire. He was nobody, a ghost, a Jedi who had stopped being a Jedi, and then the Force pulled him back. In Jedi Fallen Order, released in November of 2019, Cal is discovered by the Empire and hunted by the Inquisitors. What follows is a journey of recovery, of rebuilding not just his skills but his connection to the Force. And the game shows you something that the films rarely do. It shows you what it costs to reconnect with something you have deliberately shut away. Cal's Force abilities return in fragments. Telekinesis. Force slow, the ability to temporarily halt the movement of objects and people. Force pull. Force push. Each ability is unlocked not through training but through trauma. Cal revisits the worst moments of his past and, by confronting them, recovers what he lost. By the time of Jedi Survivor, released in April of 2023, Cal has grown substantially. His Force abilities now include the Jedi Mind Trick, Force Confusion, Telekinetic Lift and Slam, and an enhanced Force Slow that can affect multiple targets. He has survived encounters with Darth Vader himself, though survival against Vader is not the same as victory. In their first encounter, on the fortress world of Nur, Vader ragdolls Cal with terrifying ease, and Cal only escapes because of outside intervention. The gap between them is vast, but the fact that Cal survived at all, that he continued to grow, that he rebuilt himself from nothing into a Jedi capable of defeating Inquisitors and dark side warriors, that trajectory is itself a measure of his potential. What makes Cal particularly interesting from a power perspective is his relationship with the dark side. Unlike most Jedi, who treat the dark side as something to be avoided at all costs, Cal has brushed against it. In Jedi Survivor, there are moments where his anger bleeds into his fighting style, where the desperation of years on the run manifests as a fury that borders on something dangerous. He does not fall, he pulls himself back, but the fact that he touches that edge and returns speaks to a resilience that the Jedi Order's training never tested, because the Order's training was designed to prevent that touch from happening in the first place. Cal's power is not just Force strength, it is the strength to feel the darkness, to know its pull, and to choose the light anyway, every time, without a master standing behind him to catch him if he stumbles. There is also his unique Force ability, psychometry, which he shares with Quinlan Vos. Cal can read the history of objects through touch, experiencing Force echoes that reveal what happened in a particular location. This ability is woven into his gameplay and his narrative in ways that make it feel integral to who he is. Cal does not just fight his way through problems. He listens to them. He touches the walls of ancient temples and hears the voices of Jedi who died centuries before him. He picks up a lightsaber and feels the hand that last held it. The Force, for Cal, is not just a weapon or a shield. It is a record, a memory, a story told in echoes that only he can hear. Cal Kestis sits in the upper middle tier of this ranking. He is more powerful than many of the council members who preceded him, not because his raw Force potential exceeds theirs, but because his growth has been forged in conditions that no council member ever faced. He did not have the temple. He did not have masters to guide him. He did not have the collective wisdom of a 1,000-year-old institution. He had a broken lightsaber, a traumatized droid, and the Force. And he built something from that. Something real. Something that the Jedi Order, in all its grandeur, never managed to produce. A Jedi who understood loss. A Jedi who kept going anyway. There is a thread running through the Jedi we have discussed so far, and it is worth naming explicitly before we climb higher. The Jedi Order, at its height, contained thousands of members. Knights and masters and Padawans spread across the galaxy, serving the Republic, maintaining peace, training the next generation. And of those thousands, the ones who stand out on this list, the ones whose names we remember, are almost universally the ones who operated at the edges of the Order's comfort zone. The Mavericks, the outcasts, the ones who questioned the code, who formed attachments despite the rules, who walked paths the Council had not sanctioned. Qui-Gon, Anakin, Ahsoka, Kanan, Ezra, Cal, Quinlan Vos. The Jedi Order was a factory designed to produce competent, disciplined, interchangeable Force users. And the most powerful Jedi it ever produced were the ones the factory could not standardize. That is not a coincidence. That is the thesis of this ranking. Power in the Force is not produced by conformity. It is produced by authenticity, by the willingness to be fully, uncomfortably, dangerously yourself. The Order feared that authenticity because it could not control it. And it was right to fear it. Because when a Jedi who is fully himself turns toward the dark side, as Anakin did, the destruction is beyond imagining. But when a Jedi who is fully herself turns toward the light, as Ahsoka did, the result is a power that the Order's formulae could never have produced. The risk is real, but the reward is everything. Let us keep climbing. The next name on this list is someone who did something that no Jedi in recorded history had ever done before. Ezra Bridger. Ezra Bridger is the street kid from Lothal who became a Jedi under the tutelage of Kanan Jarrus during the Star Wars Rebels animated series, which ran from 2014 to 2018. Ezra's story is, in many ways, the purest Jedi story the canon has produced since Luke Skywalker. He starts with nothing. No training, no lineage, no institutional support, just a connection to the Force, and a stubbornness that borders on recklessness. And over the course of 4 seasons, he grows into something that the Jedi Order would not have known how to categorize. Ezra's signature ability is one that the canon has consistently presented as rare and extraordinary: animal empathy. The ability to communicate with and influence creatures through the Force. This is not a minor gift. In the Rebels finale, Family Reunion and Farewell, which aired on March 5, 2018, Ezra uses this ability to summon an entire pod of Purgil, the massive space-dwelling creatures that travel through hyperspace, and he directs them to attack Grand Admiral Thrawn's fleet above Lothal. The Purgil wrap their tentacles around Thrawn's Star Destroyer, the Chimera, and drag it into hyperspace with Ezra still aboard. Ezra sacrifices his place in the galaxy to save his planet. He does not fight Thrawn with a lightsaber. He does not overpower him with the Force. He calls the whales, and the whales answer. Think about what that actually means. Ezra Bridger, a Jedi with less than 4 years of formal training, established a Force connection strong enough to summon creatures from the depths of space and coordinate their movements in the middle of a battle. That is not a standard Jedi ability. That is something else, something that suggests a relationship with the living Force that most Jedi, even Masters, never achieve. The Jedi Order trained its members to command the Force. Ezra learned to ask it, and the Force, apparently, preferred being asked. But Ezra's power is not just about the animals. In Season 3, he also demonstrated a dangerous flirtation with the dark side, using a Sith holocron to access abilities that his training had not prepared him for. He used the dark side to open the holocron, to commune with the presence inside it, to access information that the light side alone could not provide. The show treats this as a cautionary tale, and it is. But it also reveals something about Ezra's raw potential. He can touch both sides of the Force. He can walk in the spaces between them. And while that flexibility nearly destroys him, it also makes him one of the most versatile Force users of his era. Ezra also interacted with the world between worlds, the mystical plane that exists outside of normal space and time, accessed through the Jedi Temple on Lothal. In the Season 4 episode, A World Between Worlds, which aired on February 26, 2018, Ezra enters this realm and uses it to reach across time itself, pulling Ahsoka Tano out of her duel with Darth Vader on Malachor moments before Vader would have killed her. He reaches through a portal, grabs her hand, and saves her life by pulling her out of her own timeline. That is not a Force push. That is not a lightsaber technique. That is bending the fabric of reality. And Ezra did it, not through power but through love, through the refusal to let someone he cared about die. There is one more aspect of Ezra's power that needs to be addressed, and it is his connection to Lothal itself. Throughout the Rebels series, Ezra's bond with his homeworld is presented not as mere sentimentality, but as a genuine Force connection. He can feel Lothal. He can sense when it is suffering, the planet's ecosystem, its loth wolves and loth cats, and the deeper living energy beneath its surface, responds to Ezra in ways that suggest a symbiotic relationship between the boy and the world that raised him. The loth wolves, massive Force-sensitive creatures that had not been seen on Lothal in generations, emerge from hiding specifically because of Ezra. They guide him, they carry him, they lead him to the world between worlds portal hidden beneath the Jedi Temple. The planet itself is working with Ezra, channeling its living Force through him to accomplish what needs to be done. That kind of connection, a bond between a Force user and an entire planet, is almost unheard of in the canon. It suggests that Ezra's relationship with the Force is not just powerful, but fundamentally different from what the Jedi Order traditionally cultivated. The Order taught its members to connect with the Force as an abstract, universal energy. Ezra connects with the Force through the specific and the local, through individual creatures, through a particular patch of Earth, through the place where he was born and the people he grew up with. His Force sensitivity is rooted in place, in home, in belonging, and that rootedness gives it a stability and a depth that the Order's more detached approach rarely achieved. When Ezra disappears into hyperspace with the Purgil at the end of Rebels, he is not running away. He is not sacrificing himself in the way that most Jedi sacrifices are understood. He is trusting the Force to take him where he needs to go. He is trusting the creatures he has bonded with to carry him through the impossible. And years later, when Ahsoka and Sabine finally find him in the Ahsoka series, he is alive. He survived. Wherever the Purgil took him, whatever he experienced in the years he was gone, Ezra Bridger endured, because the Force was with him. And the Force, for Ezra, has always been a friend rather than a weapon. Ezra Bridger sits in the upper middle tier of this ranking, possibly higher than his formal training would suggest. His raw Force potential, his unique gifts, and his willingness to go where other Jedi would not put him above many masters who had decades more training. He is the proof that power in the Force is not always about how much you can lift or how fast you can swing a blade. Sometimes it is about how deeply you can connect. And Ezra's connections, to animals, to the living Force, to the people he loved, were deeper than almost anyone on this list. Right next to Ezra, and in many ways inseparable from him, is his master, Kanan Jarrus, born Caleb Dume, the last Padawan of Depa Billaba, the Jedi who was not supposed to be a Jedi anymore. Kanan Jarrus survived Order 66 as a teenager. His master, Depa Billaba, held off the clone troopers long enough for young Caleb to run. He ran, and he kept running for years. He buried his lightsaber. He buried his name. He became Kanan Jarrus, a drifter, a smuggler, a man who drank too much and trusted too little. The Force was still there, of course. You cannot turn it off. But Kanan did his best to ignore it, to pretend it was not part of him, to live as though the Jedi had never existed and he had never been one of them. The Rebels series is the story of Kanan becoming a Jedi again. Not the kind of Jedi he was trained to be. Something different. Something the Order would not have recognized but might, in its better moments, have admired. Kanan had no Jedi Master to complete his training. He had no temple, no archives, no council to consult. He had Hera Syndulla, who believed in him. He had a crew that depended on him. And he had a kid, Ezra, who needed someone to teach him. So Kanan taught him, and in teaching Ezra, Kanan taught himself. Kanan's power grew throughout the series in ways that defied the Jedi Order's conventional understanding of progression. He defeated the Grand Inquisitor, one of the most dangerous dark-side agents the Empire had deployed, in the Season 1 finale Fire Across the Galaxy, which aired on March 2, 2015. He survived a duel with Darth Maul in Season 2. He was blinded by Maul's lightsaber strike in the Season 2 finale, Twilight of the Apprentice, which aired on March 30, 2016. And that moment, that loss, became the catalyst for his greatest growth. Blinded, Kanan had to relearn everything. He could no longer rely on his eyes. He had to trust the Force completely, and in doing so, he achieved a level of Force sensitivity that sighted Jedi rarely reach. He could see through the Force, not metaphorically, literally. He perceived the world around him through his connection to the living Force, sensing movement, intention, danger, all without physical sight. The Bendu, the ancient Force entity who exists in the middle between the light and the dark, took Kanan as a student and helped him understand that the Force was not a tool to be used, but an environment to be inhabited. Kanan stopped trying to wield the Force and started living inside it. His final act was the ultimate expression of this understanding. In the Season 4 episode Jedi Knight, which aired on February 19, 2018, Kanan holds back an explosion at a fuel depot to save his crew. The flames roar toward them, and Kanan extends his hands and pushes them back. Not with physical strength, with the Force. He holds the fire. He holds it long enough for Hera, Ezra, and Sabine to escape. And then, in his final moment, his sight returns, his eyes clear. He sees Hera's face one last time, and then the fire takes him. That scene, that final scene, it is one of the most powerful moments in all of Star Wars. Not because of the scale of the Force feat, though holding back an explosion is no small thing, but because of what it represents. Kanan Jarrus was a Padawan who never finished his training, a dropout, a failure by the Jedi Order's standards. And in the end, he achieved something that most Jedi Masters never did. He died, not as a warrior, not as a general, but as a protector. He used his power not to win a battle, but to save the people he loved. That is what a Jedi is supposed to be. That is what the Order forgot. And Kanan, who never had the Order's blessing, remembered it all by himself. There is another dimension to Kanan's power that deserves attention, and it is his relationship with Hera Syndulla. The Jedi Order forbade attachment. It taught its members that love was a pathway to fear, and fear a pathway to the dark side. Kanan Jarrus loved Hera Syndulla with an intensity and devotion that the Order would have condemned as dangerous. He loved her, and he did not hide it. He loved her, and it did not destroy him. It made him stronger. It gave him something to fight for that was more powerful than any abstract ideal. Every time Kanan stood against the Empire, every time he ignited his lightsaber and faced overwhelming odds, he was not fighting for the Republic, or for the Jedi Order, or for the abstract concept of galactic freedom. He was fighting for her, for Ezra, for Sabine, for Zeb, for the family he had built from the wreckage of the family the Empire had destroyed. And the Order would have called that attachment, would have called it a weakness, would have said it was exactly the kind of emotional vulnerability that led to the dark side. But Kanan Jarrus loved fiercely and completely, and never turned, never fell, never wavered. He proved, through the simple act of living his life, that the Jedi Order was wrong about love. That love does not lead to the dark side. That love, when it is honest and unconditional, leads to the light. It leads to a man standing in front of an inferno and holding back the fire so the people he loves can escape. It leads to the most Jedi act in the entire canon, performed by a man the Order would have considered unfinished. Kanan and Hera had a son, Jacen Syndulla, born after Kanan's death, with hair the same color as Kanan's, with his mother's determination and, presumably, his father's connection to the Force. Kanan never met his son. He died not knowing he would have one, but he died so that Hera could live, so that the future could happen, and the future happened. And somewhere in that future, a boy with green hair and Force-sensitive eyes is growing up hearing stories about his father, about the Jedi who was not supposed to be a Jedi, about the man who held back fire. Kanan Jarrus sits in the upper middle tier of this ranking. His raw Force power was not on the level of the masters who sit above him, but his journey, from broken Padawan to blind knight to willing sacrifice, is the journey that every Jedi should aspire to. He is the proof that power in the Force is not given, it is earned. And it is earned not through training exercises or lightsaber forms, but through the choices you make when everything else has been taken from you. This is the kind of deep dive we love making on Twin Suns. If you want to see more of these, subscribing is the single best way to help us keep going. Now let us talk about Depa Billaba, Kanan's master, the Jedi who gave her life so that he could run. Depa Billaba was a member of the Jedi High Council, trained by Mace Windu himself, and one of the most skilled practitioners of Vaapad, the aggressive and dangerous seventh lightsaber form that Windu developed. That lineage alone tells you something about her power. Mace Windu does not take students lightly, and Vaapad is not a technique you teach to someone who lacks the discipline to walk the edge between the light side and the dark. Depa Billaba's story is one of the great unwritten tragedies of the Star Wars canon. We know fragments. We know she was exceptional. We know Mace Windu, the most demanding teacher in the Jedi Order, chose her as his Padawan, which tells you that he saw something in her that he saw in almost no one else. We know she trained in Vaapad, a form so dangerous that most Jedi who attempted it were consumed by it. We know she sat on the Jedi Council, and we know that the Clone Wars broke her. In the Legends continuity, Depa Billaba was driven to the brink of insanity by the horrors of the war, falling into a coma after a mission on the planet Harun Kal. The canon does not directly replicate this story, but the shadows of it are there. The Clone Wars pushed every Jedi to their limit. Some, like Yoda and Obi-Wan, endured. Others, like Jarrus, cracked. And Depa Billaba existed somewhere in between, a Jedi who survived the war but carried its scars in ways the canon only hints at. In the Kanan comic series, written by Greg Weisman and published by Marvel from 2015 to 2016, Depa is shown leading clone troopers during the final days of the Clone Wars. She is a skilled commander, a fierce combatant, and a devoted teacher. When Order 66 is executed, Depa senses the shift in her troopers' behavior before they open fire. She ignites her lightsaber. She tells Caleb to run, and then she fights. She fights knowing she cannot win. She fights knowing she is going to die. She fights to buy her Padawan 10 more seconds of life. That sacrifice is the defining act of Depa Billaba's story, and it places her squarely in the tradition of Jedi who understood that their power existed not for their own survival, but for the protection of others. In terms of raw combat ability, Depa was among the Order's best. Her training in Vaapad, even if she did not reach Windu's level, placed her above the vast majority of Jedi who ever lived. Her seat on the Council was earned through demonstrated excellence in both combat and wisdom. She sits in the same tier as Kanan and Ezra, perhaps slightly above, because her formal training was more complete and her demonstrated skill set more refined. But like Kanan, her greatest moment was not a display of power, it was a display of love. Let us shift now to a Jedi whose name carries enormous weight in the Star Wars universe, despite relatively limited screen time. Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon Jinn is the Jedi Master who discovered Anakin Skywalker on Tatooine, who believed the boy was the chosen one, who defied the Jedi Council to train him, and who died on the plasma-scored floors of the Theed power generator at the end of The Phantom Menace, killed by Darth Maul's lightsaber through the abdomen. His death is the inciting incident of the entire prequel story. If Qui-Gon lives, Anakin has a master who understands the living force, who values intuition over dogma, who might have given the boy the emotional grounding that Obi-Wan, for all his virtues, could not provide. If Qui-Gon lives, there might be no Darth Vader. The galaxy changes on the blade of a Zabrak's lightsaber, but Qui-Gon's power is not measured in combat feats. He was a skilled swordsman, certainly. He wielded Form 4, Ataru, with grace and aggression. He fought Darth Maul to a near standstill alongside Obi-Wan, but he lost that fight. He died, and his death is part of what makes his ranking complicated. By the metrics of lightsaber combat and raw force application, Qui-Gon is good but not exceptional. He is a Jedi Master, but he is not Mace Windu or Yoda. His telekinetic feats are standard. His combat record is strong but not flawless. Where Qui-Gon Jinn exceeds every other Jedi on this list, with only one or two exceptions, is in his understanding of the Force itself. Qui-Gon was a student of the living Force, the aspect of the Force that flows through all living things in the present moment, as opposed to the cosmic Force, which governs destiny and the larger movements of history. The Jedi Order, by the time of the prequels, had largely shifted its focus to the cosmic force, to prophecy, to the grand narrative. Qui-Gon insisted on paying attention to what was right in front of him, to the individual, to the moment, to the boy standing in a junk shop on a desert planet who might change everything. And it was this understanding that led Qui-Gon to the single most important Force discovery in the history of the Jedi Order: immortality. Qui-Gon Jinn was the first Jedi to learn how to preserve his consciousness after death. He learned this from the Force priestesses, the mysterious beings who exist within the cosmic force. And though his training was incomplete, he was able to manifest as a disembodied voice after his death. He spoke to Yoda. He spoke to Obi-Wan. He guided them from beyond the grave. And it was Qui-Gon who taught Yoda the path to becoming a Force ghost, a technique that Yoda then passed to Obi-Wan, who passed it to Anakin, who used it to appear alongside them at the end of Return of the Jedi. Think about what that means. The entire tradition of Force ghosthood, the ability that allows dead Jedi to continue influencing the living world, traces back to Qui-Gon Jinn. Without him, there are no Force ghosts. Without Force ghosts, Obi-Wan cannot guide Luke on the Death Star run. Yoda cannot train Luke on Dagobah after death. The entire original trilogy unfolds differently. Qui-Gon Jinn is not the most powerful Jedi in terms of what he can do with a lightsaber, but he might be the most important Jedi in terms of what he understood. And understanding, in the Force, is its own form of power. Qui-Gon Jinn sits at the boundary between the upper middle tier and the upper tier of this ranking. His combat abilities place him in the middle. His wisdom and his discovery of Force immortality push him higher. He is the Jedi who saw the furthest while looking the closest, and the Order, which valued distance and detachment above all else, never quite knew what to do with him. But before we move to the upper tier, there is one more name that demands attention. A name that, for decades, existed on the periphery of this conversation, but was finally, officially, confirmed as part of it. Leia Organa. Leia Organa is not typically thought of as a Jedi. She is a princess, a senator, a general, a leader of the rebellion and the resistance. She is the political counterpart to Luke's spiritual journey. For most of the original trilogy, her connection to the Force is presented as potential rather than practice. She senses Luke's distress in The Empire Strikes Back. She reaches out to him through the Force when he hangs beneath Cloud City. And in Return of the Jedi, Luke tells her the truth. The Force is strong in his family. His father has it. He has it. And his sister has it. Leia has always had the Force. She has always been a Skywalker. And the potential she carries is identical to Luke's. The same bloodline. The same capacity for power that shook the galaxy. The Rise of Skywalker, released on December 20th, 2019, finally shows us what Leia did with that potential. In a flashback sequence, set shortly after the events of Return of the Jedi, we see Luke and Leia training together, lightsabers ignited, sparring in a forest, and Leia is good. She matches Luke blow for blow. She demonstrates skill and control, and a connection to the Force that is, in that moment, every bit the equal of her brother's. She completed her training. She became a Jedi, and then she stopped. She put down the lightsaber. She walked away from the path, not because she lacked the ability, but because she had a vision. She saw that if she continued her Jedi training, her son would die. Ben Solo's fate was tied, somehow, to Leia's path, and she chose her son over her own power. She chose to be a mother and a leader rather than a Jedi master. And in making that choice, she did something that no other Skywalker ever managed to do. She let the power go, voluntarily, without being forced, without falling, without tragedy. She simply decided that there were things more important than being the most powerful version of herself, and she walked away. That choice makes Leia extraordinarily difficult to rank. Her raw potential is Skywalker level, which places her theoretical ceiling alongside Luke and Anakin at the very top of this list. But she never fully realized that potential. She chose not to. By the time of the sequel trilogy, she uses the Force sparingly. She survives the vacuum of space in The Last Jedi by pulling herself back to the ship through a telekinetic act of sheer survival instinct. She trains Rey as a Jedi Master, passing on what Luke taught her. And in her final act, she reaches out through the Force to her son, Ben Solo, and her call is the thing that breaks through Kylo Ren's darkness and begins his return to the light. That final Force communion costs Leia her life. she dies. She becomes one with the Force, and her death is the catalyst for Ben Solo's redemption. Leia Organa sits in the upper middle tier of this ranking, perhaps higher in terms of potential, but tempered by the reality that she chose not to develop her abilities to their fullest extent. She is the Skywalker who proved that you do not need to become a Jedi to change the galaxy, that you do not need to master the Force to use it when it matters, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with power is put it down. Now we arrive at the upper tier, the Jedi who are not just powerful, but transformatively so. The ones whose abilities reshaped battles, whose choices altered the course of galactic history, whose connection to the Force went beyond skill and into something approaching mastery. And the first name in this tier is one that has been steadily ascending the ranks of Star Wars fandom for over 15 years, Ahsoka Tano. Ahsoka Tano was introduced in the 2008 Clone Wars animated film as Anakin Skywalker's Padawan, and the initial reaction from a significant portion of the fanbase was, to put it diplomatically, skeptical. She was young, she was brash, she called Anakin Sky Guy, she seemed designed to appeal to a younger audience, and older fans were not sure what to make of her. That skepticism lasted approximately one season. By the time the Clone Wars hit its stride, Ahsoka Tano had become one of the most compelling characters in the entire Star Wars saga, and her trajectory from snippy teenager to battle-hardened warrior to disillusioned ex-Jedi to something entirely new is one of the great character arcs in modern storytelling. Ahsoka's power is not easy to categorize. She was trained by Anakin Skywalker, which means she inherited a combat style that was aggressive, improvisational, and effective. Her dual-wielding lightsaber technique, using a standard saber in her main hand and a shorter Shoto blade in her offhand, is distinctive and deadly. In the Clone Wars, she demonstrates consistent growth across all 7 seasons. In the early seasons, she is capable, but clearly a learner. By Season 5, she is holding her own against Jedi hunters and dark side assassins. By Season 7, she defeats Darth Maul. That fight, the duel between Ahsoka and Maul in the Season 7 arc, The Siege of Mandalore, which aired in April and May of 2020, is one of the finest pieces of action choreography in Star Wars history. The animation team used motion capture for the lightsaber sequences, and the result is combat that feels physical and consequential in a way that animated fights rarely achieve. Ahsoka and Maul fight across the rafters of Sundari, the capital city of Mandalore, and Ahsoka wins. She defeats a former Sith Lord, a warrior who killed Qui-Gon Jinn, a Force user who had been fighting and surviving since before Ahsoka was born. She was, at that point, roughly 17 years old. Let that sit for a second. 17 years old, defeating Maul. Not through a trick or a lucky strike, but through genuine skill and power. That is not the resume of an ordinary Jedi. That is the resume of someone who belongs in the conversation about the most powerful Force users who ever lived. But Ahsoka's story does not end with the Clone Wars. She survives Order 66. She goes into hiding. She resurfaces as the operative known as Fulcrum, feeding intelligence to rebel cells across the galaxy. And then, in Rebels, she confronts the thing she has been running from, Darth Vader, her former master, the man who was once Anakin Skywalker. Their duel in the Season 2 finale, Twilight of the Apprentice, which aired on March 30th, 2016, is not a fight Ahsoka can win. She knows this. The show knows this. Vader is beyond her. His power, augmented by the dark side and fueled by decades of rage and suffering, exceeds anything she can match. But Ahsoka does not fight Vader to win. She fights him to learn the truth. And when she slashes his mask open and sees Anakin's eye underneath, when she hears his voice, distorted and broken, calling her name, she makes her choice. She will not leave him. Not this time. She was not there when he fell. She was not there to help him. But she is here now, and she stays. Ahsoka survives that encounter only because Ezra Bridger, 2 seasons later, reaches through the world between worlds and pulls her out of the moment before the temple collapses. Without that intervention, she would have died on Malachor. But she survived, and she continued to grow. There is a moment in the Clone Wars, before all of this, that tells you everything about who Ahsoka Tano is. It comes in Season 5, after the Jedi Council expels her from the Order based on false evidence. Anakin fights for her. He investigates. He discovers the truth. Barriss Offee is the bomber. Ahsoka is cleared. The Council offers to reinstate her. They tell her that the trial was the will of the Force. They tell her essentially that her suffering was a test, and she passed. And Ahsoka stands in the Council chamber, surrounded by the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy, and she says no. She turns and walks away, down the steps of the temple, into the Coruscant night, and Anakin follows her. He stands at the bottom of the steps and asks her to reconsider. And Ahsoka, with tears in her eyes, tells him that she has to find her own path, that she cannot stay in a place that did not believe in her. That moment is not a Force feat, but it might be the most powerful thing Ahsoka Tano ever does, because it takes extraordinary strength to walk away from power, to reject the institution that raised you, that gave you your identity, that told you who you were for your entire life, and to step into the unknown because you know, in your bones, that staying would compromise something fundamental about who you are. Ahsoka leaves the Order not because she has stopped believing in the Force, but because she has stopped believing in the Order's monopoly on the Force. And that distinction, the separation of the Force from the institution that claimed to represent it, is the single most important philosophical act any Jedi performs in the entire prequel era. By the time of the Ahsoka live-action series, which premiered on Disney Plus on August 23, 2023, Ahsoka Tano is something that the Jedi Order never produced. She is a fully realized Force user who is not a Jedi. She left the Order. She rejected its labels. She walks her own path. And that path has led her to a level of power and wisdom that most Jedi Knights and many Jedi Masters never reached. In the series, she fights Morgan Elsbeth in multiple encounters, engages with the world between worlds again, and demonstrates a spiritual connection to the Force that echoes the deepest traditions of the Jedi without being bound by their rules. Ahsoka's lightsaber combat in the live-action series deserves specific mention. She fights with the white lightsabers she purified from an Inquisitor's crystals, blades that carry no color alignment to either the Jedi or the Sith. White, pure, unaffiliated. The sabers themselves are a statement. They say that Ahsoka Tano does not belong to anyone's order. She is not light. She is not dark. She is Ahsoka, and Ahsoka is enough. Her fight with Morgan Elsbeth in the Ahsoka series showcases a combat maturity that goes beyond anything she demonstrated in her younger years. She is patient now, economical. She does not waste movement. She does not fight with the aggressive energy of her youth. She fights the way Obi-Wan fights, with the quiet confidence of someone who has been doing this for so long that the blade is an extension of her body, of her will, of her connection to the Force. She has absorbed the lessons of every teacher and every enemy she has ever faced. Anakin's aggression, tempered. Obi-Wan's defense, integrated. Maul's ferocity, studied and countered. Vader's power, survived and understood. Ahsoka Tano in the Ahsoka series is the product of every battle she has ever fought, and the result is a warrior who moves through combat the way water moves through a river, naturally, inevitably, without resistance. Ahsoka Tano sits in the upper tier of this ranking. She is more powerful than most Jedi Masters who ever lived. Her combat skills are elite. Her Force sensitivity is extraordinary. Her emotional intelligence, her ability to read situations and people, exceeds that of most council members. And she achieved all of this while operating outside the system that was supposed to be the only path to Jedi mastery. That is not a small thing. That is a repudiation of the Order's entire premise. You do not need the temple. You do not need the council. You do not need the rules. You need the Force. And Ahsoka has the Force in abundance. But there is a ceiling to Ahsoka's power, and that ceiling is defined by the Jedi who sit above her on this list. She could not defeat Vader. She would not have survived Sidious. Her raw Force potential, while extraordinary, does not reach the level of the absolute summit. She is among the best. She is not the best. And acknowledging that distinction does not diminish her. It simply recognizes that in a galaxy where some beings can move starships with their minds and project themselves across the cosmos, even extraordinary has levels above it. And that brings us to the Jedi whose name is, for many people, synonymous with the word itself, Obi-Wan Kenobi. There is a case to be made that Obi-Wan Kenobi is the most important Jedi in galactic history, not the most powerful, not the most gifted, the most important. Because Obi-Wan is the thread that connects every era of the Star Wars saga. He is Qui-Gon's Padawan, Anakin's master, Luke's guardian, and the voice that tells a farm boy to trust the Force and fire the shot that destroys the Death Star. Remove Obi-Wan from the equation, and the story collapses, every part of it. The prequels lose their emotional anchor. The original trilogy loses its mentor figure. The Skywalker saga loses the person who held it together across decades of loss, exile, and hope. But importance and power are not the same thing, and one of the most fascinating aspects of Obi-Wan's story is that he is not, by the metrics of raw force ability, the most talented Jedi of his generation. He knows this. The show knows this. The saga knows this. Obi-Wan Kenobi is a Jedi who achieved greatness not through natural gifts, but through discipline, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to doing what he believed was right, even when what was right cost him everything. Let us start with the combat record, because it is genuinely extraordinary. In The Phantom Menace, released on May 19, 1999, a young Obi-Wan Kenobi watches his master die at the hands of Darth Maul, and then, fueled by grief and desperation, defeats Maul by cutting him in half. He is the first Jedi in 1,000 years to defeat a Sith Lord in combat. He is a Padawan when he does it. Think about that. A student, and he kills a Sith. That alone puts him above the majority of Jedi who ever lived, because most Jedi never faced a Sith Lord, and those who did rarely survived the encounter. In Attack of the Clones, released on May 16, 2002, Obi-Wan fights Count Dooku and loses. Decisively. Dooku outclasses him in lightsaber combat and wounds him badly before Anakin intervenes and is similarly defeated. This loss is important because it establishes Obi-Wan's ceiling in the prequel era. He is not yet at the level of the Sith Lords. He is still growing, still learning, and Dooku, a former Jedi Master trained by Yoda himself, is simply better. But by Revenge of the Sith, released on May 19, 2005, Obi-Wan has closed that gap. He defeats General Grievous on Utapau, a cyborg warrior who had killed multiple Jedi and collected their lightsabers as trophies. And then he faces the fight that defines his entire story. The duel on Mustafar. Obi-Wan versus Anakin. Master versus student. Brother versus brother. The Mustafar duel is the longest single lightsaber fight in the saga, and it is not close. It stretches across multiple environments, from the interior of the mining facility to the banks of the lava river, and it is relentless. Anakin, freshly turned to the dark side and fueled by rage and the power that comes with it, is arguably the most dangerous single combatant in the galaxy at that moment. His force potential is unlimited, his aggression is total, and Obi-Wan matches him, blow for blow, step for step. For the entire length of that fight, Obi-Wan Kenobi goes toe-to-toe with the Chosen One and does not break. He wins, not through superior power, through superior positioning, through patience, through Soresu, the third lightsaber form, the wall of steel, the defensive style that turns an opponent's aggression back against them. Obi-Wan is the greatest practitioner of Form 3 in the history of the Jedi Order. That is not an exaggeration. The canon explicitly identifies him as the definitive Soresu master, and on Mustafar, that mastery saves his life and costs Anakin everything. Obi-Wan takes the high ground. Anakin leaps. Obi-Wan's blade removes his legs and his remaining arm. And then Obi-Wan stands there, on the bank of the lava river, watching the man he raised burn, and he says the words that break every part of this story into pieces. He tells Anakin that he was his brother, that he loved him. That scene, that moment, it is the emotional core of the entire prequel trilogy. And it is a scene about a man who won a fight he never wanted to have and lost everything in the process. Obi-Wan defeats Anakin on Mustafar, and it destroys him. He does not celebrate. He does not feel vindicated. He picks up Anakin's lightsaber and walks away, and he will carry the weight of that day for the next 19 years. The Obi-Wan Kenobi Limited Series, which premiered on Disney Plus on May 27, 2022, picks up 10 years after Revenge of the Sith. Obi-Wan is living in a cave on Tatooine, watching over the young Luke Skywalker from a distance. He has cut himself off from the Force. Not completely, not the way Luke will later do on Ahch-To, but substantially. He is diminished, afraid, broken by the knowledge that he failed his student and that his failure gave rise to the most feared enforcer in the galaxy. The series forces Obi-Wan back into action when the young Princess Leia is kidnapped, and his walk through the 6 episodes is a journey of reconnection. Reconnection to the Force, reconnection to his purpose, and reconnection to the fight he thought was over. The climax comes in the final episode, when Obi-Wan faces Darth Vader on a barren moon. And this time, the fight is different. Obi-Wan starts badly. Vader buries him under rocks, pounding the earth with the Force, crushing stone on top of him. And Obi-Wan, buried and broken, closes his eyes. He thinks of Luke. He thinks of Leia. He thinks of the people he is fighting for. And the Force floods back into him. What happens next is one of the most spectacular displays of telekinetic power in the live-action Star Wars canon. Obi-Wan rises from the rubble. He lifts an entire field of boulders with the Force, suspending them in the air around him, and then hurls them at Vader with devastating force. The rocks slam into Vader, staggering him, and Obi-Wan presses the attack. He overpowers Vader. He slashes open Vader's mask, revealing the scarred face of Anakin Skywalker underneath. And then, for the second time in his life, he stands over the broken body of his former student and has to decide what to do. He walks away. Again, he cannot kill him. He will never be able to kill him. And that mercy, that refusal to deliver the killing blow, is the thing that will eventually save the galaxy. Because Anakin Skywalker, the part of him that still exists beneath the Vader mask, will remember that Obi-Wan could not kill him. And 20 years later, when Luke Skywalker offers Vader the same mercy, the same belief that there is still good in him, it will echo, it will resonate, and it will be enough. And then there is the final duel. A New Hope, the Death Star. Obi-Wan is old now. His hair is white. His movements are slower. He has spent 19 years in the desert, and the desert has taken its toll. When he faces Vader aboard the Death Star, the fight is nothing like Mustafar. It is slow, measured. 2 old enemies circling each other with blades they have wielded for decades. And Obi-Wan knows he is not going to survive this fight. He does not intend to. There is a moment, just before the end, where Obi-Wan glances across the hangar bay and sees Luke watching. Their eyes meet, and Obi-Wan smiles. He raises his lightsaber. He closes his eyes, and Vader's blade passes through him. But Obi-Wan's body does not fall. It vanishes. The cloak collapses. The man is gone, and the Force has gained something that Vader, with all his power, cannot touch. A ghost, a guide, a voice that will speak to Luke Skywalker at the most critical moment in galactic history and say 4 words: "Use the Force, Luke." That sacrifice is itself a Force feat that most people do not recognize as such. Obi-Wan chose the moment of his death. He chose to become one with the Force at the precise instant that would serve the greater purpose. He had learned the technique from Qui-Gon, perfected it over his years of exile, and deployed it at the exact moment when his death would inspire Luke, and his continued existence as a Force ghost would prove more valuable than his physical survival. That is not the act of a defeated man. That is the act of a Jedi Master who understood, perhaps better than anyone in the entire saga, that there are things more powerful than survival. Obi-Wan's final contribution to the galaxy comes in that moment on the Death Star trench run. Luke is hurtling down the narrow channel, fighters on his tail, the exhaust port approaching. His targeting computer is locked. Everyone is telling him to use the technology. And then he hears Obi-Wan's voice. "Use the Force, Luke. Let go. Trust me." And Luke does. He turns off the targeting computer. He closes his eyes. He fires, and the Death Star explodes. Obi-Wan Kenobi, from beyond the grave, guides the shot that saves the rebellion. That is the kind of power that persists after death. That is the kind of power that transcends everything else on this list. Obi-Wan Kenobi sits firmly in the upper tier of this ranking. His combat record is among the best of any Jedi who ever lived. 2 victories over Maul, a victory over Grievous, a victory over Anakin Skywalker, the most powerful Force user in history, a victory over Darth Vader in their rematch. His mastery of Soresu is unparalleled. His Force abilities, while not as naturally gifted as some others on this list, are formidable enough to go toe-to-toe with the strongest dark-side users in the galaxy and survive. There is a quiet tragedy embedded in Obi-Wan's story that this ranking needs to sit with for a moment. Obi-Wan Kenobi loved Anakin Skywalker. The films make this explicit. The Clone Wars makes it unavoidable. Their banter, their teamwork, the way they finish each other's sentences, and cover each other's weaknesses and argue like two people who have been arguing for so long that the arguments themselves have become a form of affection. Obi-Wan and Anakin are, in every way that matters, brothers. And the Jedi Order told Obi-Wan not to feel that way. The code said detachment. The code said serenity. The code said do not form bonds that the dark side can exploit. And Obi-Wan tried. He tried so hard to follow the code. He tried to be the perfect Jedi, the dispassionate master, the teacher who cares about his student's progress without caring too much about his student. And he failed. Because you cannot spend a decade fighting alongside someone, saving each other's lives, watching each other grow, and not love them. The code was wrong about that. It was always wrong about that. And Obi-Wan's attempt to follow the code, to maintain distance when closeness was what Anakin needed, to model detachment when Anakin was drowning in attachment, that attempt is part of what drove Anakin toward Palpatine. Palpatine, who had no rules about attachment. Palpatine, who told Anakin exactly what he wanted to hear. Palpatine, who was the friend that Obi-Wan, bound by the code, could not quite allow himself to be. Obi-Wan's love for Anakin did not save Anakin, but it saved Luke. It saved Leia. It saved the galaxy. Because Obi-Wan endured 19 years of desert exile not out of duty but out of love. He watched over Luke because Luke was Anakin's son, and everything Obi-Wan could not give Anakin, he could give to the boy. Every lesson, every protection, every ounce of care that the code had told him to withhold, Obi-Wan poured it all into the guardian role. And when the time came, he gave his life so that Luke could escape the Death Star and become the Jedi that Anakin should have been. That is love. Complicated, imperfect, aching love. And it changed everything. But more than that, Obi-Wan represents something about Jedi power that the Order itself often overlooked. Hard work, dedication, the willingness to keep going when natural talent would have been easier. Obi-Wan was not the chosen one. He was not born with limitless potential. He was a good student who became a great knight, who became an extraordinary master, and he did it through sheer force of will. That is its own kind of power. And in the end, it was enough to defeat the chosen one himself. If you have made it this far into the ranking, you are one of us. Consider subscribing so you do not miss the next one. Now we arrive at one of the most debated figures in any discussion of Jedi power. Rey. Rey is the protagonist of the sequel trilogy, the scavenger from Jakku who discovered her connection to the Force and eventually took on the Skywalker name. Her placement on this list is, inevitably, controversial, because no character in Star Wars history has generated as much argument about whether their power level is earned, justified, or narratively satisfying. That argument is valid and worth having, but it is not the argument this ranking is making. This ranking is about power as demonstrated in the canon. And in the canon, Rey's power is extraordinary. Let us start with the facts. In The Force Awakens, released on December 18, 2015, Rey demonstrates several Force abilities without any formal training. She resists Kylo Ren's mental probe, a technique that even trained Force users struggle against. She performs a Jedi mind trick on a stormtrooper, an ability that typically requires significant training to execute. And she defeats Kylo Ren in a lightsaber duel, though Ren is wounded, emotionally destabilized, and not fighting at full capacity. These feats, viewed in isolation, are impressive. Viewed in context, they are polarizing, because the film does not provide a clear explanation for how Rey can do these things. The Force Awakens treats Rey's power as a mystery to be solved later. The Last Jedi, released on December 15, 2017, begins to provide answers. Rey travels to Ahsoka and receives limited training from a reluctant Luke Skywalker. Her connection to the Force is shown to be instinctive rather than learned. She goes straight to the dark side cave beneath the island, pulled there by the Force itself, and she does not resist. She reaches into the darkness and is not consumed by it. Luke is terrified by this. He has seen raw power like this before, in Ben Solo, and he knows what it can become. But Rey is not Ben. Her relationship with the dark side is different. She touches it and walks away. The film also introduces the Force bond between Rey and Kylo Ren, a connection that allows them to communicate across vast distances, to see each other, to hear each other, to physically interact across the gulf of space. This bond is eventually revealed in The Rise of Skywalker to be a Force dyad, a connection between two Force users that occurs once in a generation and creates a power greater than either individual possesses alone. The dyad is described as a vergence in the Force, a phenomenon of extraordinary significance. In The Rise of Skywalker, released on December 20th, 2019, Rey's power reaches its fullest expression. She demonstrates Force healing, an ability that allows her to transfer her own life force to mend wounds and even restore life. She heals a giant sand serpent on Pasaana. She heals Ben Solo after stabbing him with his own lightsaber during their duel on the wreckage of the second Death Star. And ultimately, the healing power flows in reverse. After Rey dies from the exertion of defeating Emperor Palpatine, Ben Solo uses the same technique to revive her, sacrificing his own life in the process. The defeat of Palpatine itself is Rey's single greatest Force feat. The resurrected Emperor, powered by the Force dyad and channeling the strength of all the Sith who came before him, unleashes Force lightning of such magnitude that it disables an entire fleet of starships in orbit. Rey, broken and dying, calls upon the spirits of every Jedi who ever lived. She hears their voices: Luke, Leia, Anakin, Obi-Wan, Yoda, Mace Windu, Qui-Gon, Ahsoka, Kanan, and more. They speak to her. They give her strength. And Rey, channeling the collective power of the Jedi across all of history, reflects Palpatine's lightning back at him with two lightsabers crossed before her and destroys him. This needs to be stated plainly. Rey defeated Palpatine, the most powerful Sith Lord who ever lived, the being who orchestrated the fall of the Republic, the destruction of the Jedi Order, and the rise of the Empire, the being who killed Mace Windu, fought Yoda to a standstill, and survived death itself through dark side sorcery. Rey destroyed him. She did not do it alone. The voices of the Jedi past supported her, strengthened her, flowed through her, but she was the vessel. She was the one who stood there and did not break. There is a reading of Rey's power that frames it as unearned, as the sequel trilogy's failure to properly develop her abilities, making her victories feel hollow. And there is a reading that frames her power as the culmination of the entire Jedi tradition, the final expression of everything the Order was supposed to be, channeled through a single person at the moment the galaxy needed it most. Both readings have textual support. This ranking does not adjudicate between them. It simply acknowledges what happened. Rey defeated Palpatine. Rey healed with the Force. Rey connected across space through a dyad. Rey channeled the voices of every Jedi. Those are her feats. And by those feats, she sits in the upper tier. There is something else about Rey that this ranking needs to acknowledge, and it is the fact that her power exists in a unique relationship to lineage. Rey is a Palpatine, the granddaughter of the most powerful Sith Lord who ever lived. Her bloodline is darkness. Her genetic inheritance is the same dark side energy that corrupted the Republic, destroyed the Jedi Order, and enslaved the galaxy for decades. And Rey takes that inheritance and turns it toward the light. That reversal is, in many ways, the mirror image of Anakin's story. Anakin was the chosen one, conceived by the Force itself, born into the light, and turned toward the darkness. Rey is the granddaughter of darkness, born into obscurity, and turned toward the light. Anakin's story is about how even the most powerful forces of good can be corrupted. Rey's story is about how even the deepest roots of evil can produce something good. Together, they form a complete picture. The Force does not deal in inevitabilities. It deals in choices. And choices, not bloodlines, are what determine which side of the Force wins. Rey's choice to take the Skywalker name at the end of The Rise of Skywalker is the final expression of this idea. She is not a Skywalker by blood. She is a Skywalker by choice. She chooses to carry the legacy of the family that taught her, trained her, and believed in her, rather than the legacy of the family that created her. She chooses the light, not because it is in her blood, not because the Force ordained it, because she wants to, because she believes in what the Skywalker name represents, and in that choice, she proves something that the entire saga has been building toward. Power is not destiny. Power is a choice, and the choice to use it for good, to stand against the darkness even when the darkness is in your veins, that is the most powerful choice anyone can make. Rey sits above Ahsoka and alongside Obi-Wan in this ranking. Her raw Force power, as demonstrated, is enormous. Her specific abilities, including healing, the dyad, and the channeling of Jedi spirits, are unique in the canon. Whether those abilities are the product of her Palpatine bloodline, the dyad, the Force itself choosing her, or some combination of all three, the result is a Jedi whose power at her peak exceeds that of most who ever carried the title. The debate about her character will continue, and it should, but the power is in the text, and the text is what this ranking measures. There is a pattern emerging in this ranking, and it is worth pausing to name. The Jedi who occupy the upper tier, the ones we have just discussed, are all defined by something beyond their combat abilities. Ahsoka is defined by her independence. Obi-Wan is defined by his perseverance. Rey is defined by her choice. Each of them possesses extraordinary force power, but the thing that elevates them, the thing that separates them from the merely powerful, is a quality of character that transcends technique. They are not just strong, they are true. True to themselves, true to their convictions, true to the people they love. And that truth, that alignment between who they are and how they use their power, is what makes them dangerous to the dark side, in ways that raw strength alone never could. The dark side feeds on conflict, on division, on the gap between what a person wants and what a person has. The Jedi who are most vulnerable to the dark side are the ones who are at war with themselves, who suppress desires they cannot extinguish, who pretend to be something they are not. The Jedi who are most resistant to the dark side are the ones who have achieved internal coherence, who know themselves completely, who have confronted their shadows and found peace with them. Ahsoka knows who she is. Obi-Wan knows what he is willing to sacrifice. Rey knows where she came from and has chosen where she is going. There is no gap in them for the dark side to exploit. No crack. No hidden room where fear festers in the dark. They are, in the deepest sense of the word, whole. And wholeness, in the Star Wars galaxy, is the ultimate defense. That brings us to the Jedi who sits at the gateway between the upper tier and the absolute summit. A Jedi whose power was so distinctive, so unlike anything else the Order produced, that it defied categorization even within an institution that prided itself on categorizing everything. Mace Windu. Mace Windu was, by virtually every account, the greatest lightsaber duelist the Jedi Order ever produced. That is a statement that might seem like hyperbole, but the canon supports it with remarkable consistency. Yoda was more powerful in the Force. Anakin had more raw potential. But in terms of pure lightsaber combat, the ability to take a blade and use it to defeat any opponent in single combat, Mace Windu stood alone. The reason for this was Vaapad. Vaapad is the seventh lightsaber form, and it is different from every other form in a way that goes beyond technique into philosophy. Mace Windu developed it during the later years of the Republic. It is not a set of moves, it is a state of mind. The practitioner of Vaapad opens themselves to the dark side, not to use it, but to channel it. They become, in the language of the technique, one half of a superconducting loop. The other half is the darkness in their opponent. The practitioner draws their opponent's dark side energy into themselves, channels it through their body, and releases it back through their blade. The angrier the opponent, the more powerful the Vaapad user becomes. The darker the enemy, the brighter the Vaapad burns. This is an extraordinarily dangerous technique. Of the few Jedi who attempted to learn it, only Windu truly mastered it. The technique demands that its user walk the razor's edge between light and dark, drawing power from the darkness without being consumed by it. It requires a level of self-discipline that borders on the superhuman. And Windu had it. He walked that edge for decades and never fell. The defining moment of Mace Windu's story, and the moment that cements his place near the top of this ranking, is his duel with Darth Sidious in the Chancellor's office. Revenge of the Sith. Windu has just learned that Palpatine is the Sith Lord. He takes 3 Jedi Masters with him to make the arrest. Kit Fisto, Ajan Kolar, Saesee Tiin, and Sidious kills 3 of them in seconds. Fisto lasts slightly longer, but within moments, it is Windu alone against the most powerful Sith Lord in history, and Windu wins. George Lucas confirmed this in his commentary for the film. Windu genuinely defeats Sidious in their lightsaber duel. He disarms the Sith Lord. He knocks him to the ground. He stands over him with his purple blade pointed at Palpatine's throat. The Vaapad did exactly what it was designed to do. Sidious, a being of pure dark side malice, fed Windu's technique with his own darkness, and Windu turned it all back against him. The superconducting loop closed, the light channeled the darkness, and the darkness lost. There is debate about whether Sidious threw the fight intentionally, whether the entire encounter was staged to push Anakin toward the dark side. And that debate has merit. Palpatine is a manipulator of supreme skill, and the timing of Anakin's arrival, the theatricality of Sidious's sudden helplessness, the lightning that conveniently scars his face in front of a sympathetic witness, all of it suggests a plan within a plan. But even if Sidious allowed himself to be put in that position, even if the larger chess game was always under his control, the lightsaber duel itself was real. Windu's blade at Sidious's throat was real. And the fact that Windu could get there, could stand in front of the full power of the dark side, and not just survive but prevail, that is a feat that no other Jedi on this list can match. Mace Windu's force abilities beyond the lightsaber were also considerable. In the 2003 Clone Wars microseries, created by Genndy Tartakovsky, Windu is shown destroying an entire droid army with his bare hands, using force-enhanced strikes to shatter battle droids and even punch out a seismic tank. While the microseries is not part of the current canon, the image of Windu as a force of nature on the battlefield is consistent with his portrayal across all media. The current canon does not give us a single showcase moment for Windu's telekinetic power on that scale, but his position as the Order's premier combatant and his defeat of Sidious tell you everything you need to know about the depth of his abilities. There is something else about Windu that this ranking needs to address, and it is the quality that separates him from the Jedi who sit above him. Mace Windu was, by every measure, a nearly perfect Jedi by the Order's standards. He was disciplined, powerful, wise, and committed to the code. But that perfection was also his limitation. Windu was rigid in ways that the Jedi above him on this list were not. He was the one who rejected Anakin's training. He was the one who dismissed Ahsoka's concerns. He was the one who could not see the Chancellor's manipulation because his faith in the system blinded him to its corruption. In the Clone Wars, Windu's rigidity is on display in episode after episode. He is the voice of orthodoxy on the Council. When Ahsoka is framed for the temple bombing, Windu is among those who expel her from the Order without adequate investigation. When she is cleared, his apology is perfunctory and insufficient. He tells Ahsoka that the Force works in mysterious ways, that her trial was actually the will of the Force testing her. And Ahsoka, standing there in the council chamber, looking at the faces of the masters who abandoned her, makes a decision that Windu cannot comprehend. She leaves. She walks away from the Order. And Windu, the consummate institutional Jedi, cannot understand why. That inability to understand is the gap in Windu's power. He could defeat Sidious in a lightsaber duel. He could walk the edge between light and dark and never fall, but he could not see the human being standing in front of him. He could not recognize that Ahsoka's departure was not a failure of her commitment, but a failure of the institution's compassion. He could not see that the Order's rigidity was producing exactly the conditions that would allow the dark side to flourish. Windu had power, extraordinary power, but he lacked the empathy that separates the merely powerful from the truly great. Mace Windu sits at the boundary between the upper tier and the absolute summit. His lightsaber skills are unmatched. His Vaapad makes him uniquely dangerous against dark side opponents. His force abilities are formidable, and his defeat of Sidious, however you interpret the context, is the single most impressive combat achievement any Jedi has ever recorded against a Sith Lord. He was not the most powerful in the Force. He was the most dangerous in a fight. And in a galaxy defined by conflict, that distinction matters enormously. But in a galaxy also defined by compassion, by the choices people make when power alone is not enough, Windu's story is a cautionary tale. He had everything the Order could give him, and it was almost, but not quite, enough. But the Jedi who sit above Mace Windu are not defined by how well they fight. They are defined by something deeper, something that transcends combat and technique and touches the fundamental nature of the Force itself. We are now at the summit. 3 names. 3 Jedi who represent the highest peaks of power the canon has ever shown us. And the first of those 3 has been at the top of the Jedi Order for longer than most civilizations have existed. Yoda. 900 years. That is how long Yoda served the Jedi Order. 900 years of training, of teaching, of leading, of fighting, of meditating, of communing with the Force. When Yoda was born, the Republic was young. When he died, the Republic had fallen, risen, and was about to fall again. He trained Jedi who trained Jedi who trained Jedi. His influence rippled through the Order like a stone dropped in still water, the circles spreading outward for centuries. By the time of the prequel trilogy, Yoda is the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, its oldest and most revered member, and arguably the most powerful living Jedi in the galaxy. But what does Yoda's power actually look like? The films show us a few key moments. In Attack of the Clones, Yoda duels Count Dooku, after Dooku has already defeated both Obi-Wan and Anakin. Yoda absorbs Dooku's Force lightning with his bare hands, then launches into a lightsaber duel that showcases his mastery of Ataru, the fourth form, using the Force to compensate for his small stature with incredible speed and acrobatic ability. Dooku cannot match him. The fight ends only because Dooku threatens the lives of Obi-Wan and Anakin, forcing Yoda to break off and save them. But the message is clear. In a straight fight, Yoda is Dooku's superior. In Revenge of the Sith, Yoda faces Darth Sidious in the Senate chamber on Coruscant. This is the fight that defines Yoda's place on this list, because it is the fight that reveals both his extraordinary power and his ultimate limitation. Yoda enters the Senate chamber and confronts the newly declared Emperor. They clash with lightsabers. They clash with the Force, hurling Senate pods at each other with telekinetic power that shakes the entire building. The fight is ferocious. It is the two most powerful Force users of their generation, light and dark, colliding with everything they have. And Yoda does not win. The fight ends in a stalemate, with Yoda knocked loose from a Senate pod and falling to the chamber floor. He retreats. He tells Bail Organa that into exile he must go. He has failed, not because he is weaker than Sidious in raw power. The fight suggests they are roughly equal, but because the Jedi way, the way of the light side as the Order understood it, was not enough to defeat what Sidious represented. Yoda's failure against Sidious is not a failure of power. It is a failure of philosophy. The Jedi Order's approach to the Force, the approach Yoda had championed for 900 years, had reached its limit. And Yoda, to his eternal credit, recognized it. That recognition is what leads to the most important chapter of Yoda's story, the Clone Wars Season 6, The Lost Missions, the final 4 episodes of that season, which were released on Netflix on March 7, 2014. In this arc, Yoda hears the voice of the dead Qui-Gon Jinn, and follows it on a journey that takes him to Dagobah, to the wellspring of life where the midi-chlorians originate, and ultimately to the Force priestesses themselves. The 5 priestesses, enigmatic manifestations of the cosmic force, administer a series of trials that are not about combat, but about self-knowledge. The most significant trial forces Yoda to confront his own dark side. A shadowy version of himself, small and vicious, and full of rage, emerges and attacks him. And Yoda does something that no other Jedi in the canon has been shown doing in quite this way. He acknowledges it. He accepts that the darkness is part of him. He does not fight it. He does not suppress it. He says essentially, "You are me." And in that acceptance, the dark Yoda dissolves. It cannot exist separately if Yoda refuses to deny it. Think about what that means in the context of the Jedi Order. For centuries, the Order's approach to the dark side was rejection, denial. The dark side is the enemy. It must be resisted. It must be overcome. And Yoda, the Grand Master, the embodiment of that philosophy, goes on a journey and discovers that the way to transcend the darkness is not to fight it, but to accept it as part of yourself. That is a revolution. A quiet, internal revolution that the Order never gets to benefit from, because the Order is destroyed before Yoda can share what he has learned. The trials also lead Yoda to the planet Moraband, the ancient homeworld of the Sith, where he faces an illusion of Darth Sidious and an army of Sith spirits. He resists them, he sees through the deception, and in doing so, he proves to the priestesses that he is worthy of learning the secret of eternal consciousness. Yoda does not complete this training during the Clone Wars, but the seed is planted, and by the time of his death on Dagobah, decades later, Yoda has mastered the technique. He becomes a Force ghost. He manifests to Luke on Ahch-To in The Last Jedi. He summons lightning from the sky to set the ancient Jedi tree ablaze. Even in death, Yoda is one of the most powerful Force users in the galaxy. Yoda sits at the beginning of the summit. He is more powerful than everyone below him on this list by a significant margin. His Force abilities are extraordinary. His lightsaber skills, despite his size, are among the finest in Jedi history. His wisdom, earned over 9 centuries, is unmatched. and his willingness to confront his own limitations, to accept that the order he led for centuries was wrong about fundamental aspects of the Force. That is perhaps the greatest feat of all, because admitting you were wrong when you are 900 years old and everyone has been looking to you for answers for longer than most beings can comprehend, that requires a kind of strength that has nothing to do with the Force and everything to do with character. But there is another moment of Yoda's that deserves discussion, and it comes not from the prequels or the animated series, but from the film that defined him for an entire generation. The Empire Strikes Back. Dagobah, the swamp. Luke Skywalker arrives on Dagobah looking for a great warrior. He finds a small green creature rummaging through his supplies. The joke, and it is a joke, is that the greatest Jedi who ever lived looks nothing like what a great Jedi should look like. He is tiny. He walks with a stick. He speaks in riddles and seems vaguely amused by everything. And when Luke finally realizes who he is talking to, when Yoda drops the act and reveals himself, the tone shifts. Yoda is not a comedy figure. He is ancient. He is sad. He has been alone on this planet for years, waiting for the boy the Force promised would come. And now the boy is here, and Yoda is not sure the boy is ready. The training sequences on Dagobah are some of the most important scenes in the entire saga, not because of what they show, but because of what they teach. Yoda has Luke run through the swamp with the little master on his back. He has Luke stand on one hand and stack rocks with the Force. He has Luke enter the dark side cave, where Luke faces a phantom Vader and cuts off its head, only to see his own face behind the mask. Each exercise is designed to teach Luke the same lesson. The Force is not a weapon. It is not a tool. It is an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us. It penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together. Size matters not. And then comes the scene. Luke's X-Wing has sunk into the swamp. Luke tries to lift it with the Force. He strains. He reaches. He fails. The ship sinks deeper. And Luke, frustrated and exhausted, says he cannot do it. Yoda tells him it is no different from lifting a rock. Luke says he wants the impossible, and Yoda closes his eyes. He extends his hand, and the X-Wing rises. Slowly, steadily, water streaming from its hull. It lifts from the swamp and settles on solid ground. And Luke says the words that break Yoda's heart. I do not believe it. And Yoda, quietly, devastatingly, responds, that is why you fail. That scene is not just a demonstration of Yoda's telekinetic power, though it is that. It is a demonstration of something far more profound. Yoda lifts a starfighter with the Force, not through strain or effort, but through understanding. Through the absolute, unshakable knowledge that the Force does not distinguish between a pebble and a starship. The only thing that creates the distinction is the mind of the user. Luke could not lift the X-Wing because he believed it was too heavy. Yoda could lift it because he understood that weight is irrelevant. The Force does not care how much something weighs. It only cares whether you trust it. 900 years of wisdom condensed into a single gesture. A small green hand extended toward a sunken ship, and the ship rises. That is Yoda. That is what 900 years of communion with the Force looks like. Not lightning and fury and spectacle. Stillness. Certainty. The quiet knowledge that the Force will do what you ask because you and the Force are the same thing. Years later, after his death on Dagobah, Yoda appears to Luke as a Force ghost on Ahto in The Last Jedi, released on December 15, 2017. Luke has retreated to the island, convinced that the Jedi must end, that their legacy is failure. And Yoda, cackling and irreverent and impossibly wise, sets fire to the tree that houses the ancient Jedi texts by calling down a bolt of lightning from the sky. A Force ghost, manipulating weather, interacting with the physical world in a way that should be impossible for a being who has left the corporeal plane. And when Luke panics about the burning texts, Yoda says something that cuts through centuries of Jedi dogma. Page-turners, they were not. The lesson is clear. The books do not matter. The institution does not matter. The rules do not matter. What matters is what you carry inside you. And what Luke carries inside him, what Yoda taught him all those years ago on Dagobah, that is enough. Even Yoda has his limits. He could not defeat Sidious. He could not prevent the fall of the Republic. He could not save the Jedi Order. And there are 2 Jedi on this list who, in their finest moments, achieved things that Yoda could not. We are almost at the top now. 2 names left, and the gap between them and everyone else on this list is a chasm. The next name at the summit is Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker is the most mythic figure in the Star Wars saga, and the word mythic is chosen deliberately because Luke's power is inseparable from his narrative function. He is the hero of the original trilogy. He is the farm boy who became a knight. He is the son who redeemed his father. He is the legend who retreated from the galaxy and then returned to save it one last time. His story is the skeleton on which the entire Star Wars mythology hangs, and his power, measured across the full scope of his canonical appearances, is staggering. Let us trace the trajectory. In A New Hope, released on May 25, 1977, Luke Skywalker is a teenager on a moisture farm. He has no training. He has no knowledge of the Force. He has a dead father, or so he believes, and an uncle who wants him to stay home and farm moisture. His entire connection to the Force, at the start of the story, is a vague feeling, a sense that there is something more. And then Obi-Wan Kenobi gives him a lightsaber and tells him the truth, or a version of it, and everything changes. Luke's first significant Force feat is the destruction of the Death Star. He turns off his targeting computer. He closes his eyes. He reaches out with the Force and fires the proton torpedoes into an exhaust port that is, according to the Rebels' own analysis, virtually impossible to hit. He hits it. The Death Star explodes, and a farm boy from Tatooine becomes the most important person in the galaxy. That shot is not a small thing. It is a Force-guided act of extraordinary precision, performed by someone with less than a week of training, under combat conditions, while being chased by Darth Vader himself. It is the announcement that Luke Skywalker is something special. In The Empire Strikes Back, released on May 21, 1980, Luke receives his first real training from Yoda on Dagobah. The training lasts several weeks, and in that time Yoda sees something in Luke that both thrills and terrifies him. Luke is powerful, genuinely powerful. His connection to the Force is instinctive and deep, a product of the Skywalker bloodline, of the same genetic legacy that made his father the most powerful Jedi in history. But Luke is also impatient, reckless, and emotionally volatile. He looks to the horizon. He looks to the future. He never keeps his mind on where he is, what he is doing. He is his father's son in every way, and that resemblance frightens Yoda more than anything else. The cave scene on Dagobah is one of the most symbolically dense moments in the saga. Yoda sends Luke into a cave strong with the dark side. Luke asks what is in there. Yoda tells him only what he takes with him. Luke takes his weapons. He enters the cave and encounters a phantom Darth Vader. They fight. Luke cuts Vader's head off. The helmet rolls. The faceplate explodes open, and inside is Luke's own face. The message is clear, and Luke does not understand it. Not yet. He will. Years later, on the second Death Star, when he cuts off Vader's mechanical hand and sees the mirror of his own prosthetic, the cave's warning will finally land. But on Dagobah, at this stage of his journey, Luke is not ready to hear it. Luke wants to learn, but he wants to learn fast. He wants to save his friends more than he wants to complete his training. And when the vision comes, when he sees Han and Leia suffering in Cloud City, he leaves Dagobah against Yoda's advice and flies into a trap. The result is his first confrontation with Darth Vader, and it goes exactly as badly as Yoda predicted. Vader toys with him. Luke is outmatched in every conceivable way. His lightsaber technique is crude. His Force abilities are developing but nowhere near Vader's level. Vader dismembers him, removes his right hand with a single stroke, and then drops the revelation that shatters everything Luke thought he knew. I am your father. Luke's response is to throw himself into a shaft rather than join the dark side. He would rather die than become what Vader is. That choice, that refusal, is Luke's first truly great act. Not a feat of Force power, a feat of will. By Return of the Jedi, released on May 25, 1983, Luke has changed. He walks into Jabba's palace with a plan. He uses the Jedi mind trick on Jabba's major domo, Bib Fortuna. He faces the Rancor. He fights on the sail barge over the Sarlacc pit with a confidence and skill that his Empire Strikes Back self did not possess. He has grown, significantly. And when he finally confronts Vader again, aboard the second Death Star, the fight is different. Luke is no longer outmatched. He fights Vader to a standstill. He presses the attack. And when Vader threatens Leia, When the Emperor goads Luke by revealing that Luke's sister could be turned to the dark side, something snaps. Luke unleashes everything. He batters Vader's defenses down. He drives him back. He cuts off Vader's mechanical hand with a final, devastating strike. And then he stops. He looks at Vader's severed mechanical hand. He looks at his own mechanical hand. And he sees the mirror. He sees what he is becoming. And he throws his lightsaber away. He turns to the Emperor and says no. He will not fight. He will not kill. He will not become what they want him to become. He is a Jedi, like his father before him. The Emperor responds with Force Lightning, the most powerful dark side attack in the galaxy, channeled through the most powerful Sith Lord who ever lived, poured directly into Luke's body. And Luke screams. He calls out for his father, not for Vader, for his father, for Anakin. And Anakin Skywalker, hearing his son's voice, makes the choice that Darth Vader never could. He grabs the Emperor. He lifts him over his head. He throws him into the reactor shaft. He saves his son. He destroys the Sith. He fulfills the prophecy, and he dies. That sequence, from the throne room duel to the Emperor's death, is the most important sequence in the entire Star Wars saga. Every prequel film points toward it. Every sequel film echoes it. And at its center is Luke Skywalker, the boy from Tatooine, standing between the two most powerful dark side users in history and defeating them both. Not through the Force, not through combat, through the one thing they never expected, surrender. Not surrender to the darkness, surrender to the truth. He is a Jedi. He will not kill his father. He will not serve the Emperor. He will be what he is, fully and completely. And if that means dying on the floor of the throne room, then he will die on the floor of the throne room. But he will not fall. He will not turn. He will not break. The Emperor could not process this. Sidious, who had spent decades manipulating Force users by exploiting their fears and desires, who had turned Anakin Skywalker himself by dangling the promise of saving Padme, could not understand a person who wanted nothing. Luke did not want power. He did not want revenge. He did not want survival if survival meant becoming something he was not. He wanted his father back. That was all. And it was the one thing the dark side could not offer or comprehend. Luke did not defeat the Emperor through Force power. He defeated the Emperor through love. Through the refusal to give in to hatred. Through the belief that his father, somewhere inside that black suit, was still alive. That is not a Force push or a lightsaber technique. That is something much harder. And it is the thing that Yoda and Obi-Wan, for all their wisdom, had given up on. They told Luke to kill Vader. They told him there was no other way. Luke found another way. And the galaxy was saved because a farm boy from Tatooine loved his father enough to throw away his weapon. But Luke's story does not end with the original trilogy. And this is where his power truly reaches its apex. In the years between Return of the Jedi and the sequel trilogy, Luke becomes a Jedi Master. He begins training a new generation of Jedi. He builds a temple. He takes students. And one of those students, his own nephew Ben Solo, is seduced by the dark side. Luke senses the darkness growing in Ben. He goes to Ben's quarters one night. He ignites his lightsaber for a brief, terrible moment. The instinct to stop the darkness before it can spread. And then he stops himself. But Ben sees. Ben wakes to his uncle standing over him with a drawn weapon. And the damage is done. Ben Solo becomes Kylo Ren. He destroys the temple. He kills students. And Luke, consumed by guilt and failure, retreats to the most unfindable place in the galaxy, Ahch-To, the site of the first Jedi temple, and he cuts himself off from the Force. The Last Jedi, released on December 15, 2017, is the story of Luke Skywalker confronting his own failure and finding his way back to the Force. When Rey arrives on Ahch-To, looking for the legendary Luke Skywalker, she finds a broken man, a hermit, someone who has decided that the Jedi should end. The scene where she hands him his father's lightsaber, the weapon he lost on Bespin, the weapon that Anakin carried through the Clone Wars, and Luke takes it and throws it over his shoulder. That moment is designed to shock. And it does. Because it tells you that the myth of Luke Skywalker and the reality of Luke Skywalker are not the same thing. But the reality of Luke Skywalker is, in the end, greater than the myth. Because when the Resistance is trapped on Crate, when Kylo Ren has brought the full weight of the First Order to bear against the last spark of hope in the galaxy, Luke Skywalker comes back. He steps out of the base. He faces the entire First Order army. He faces Kylo Ren, and he does it from halfway across the galaxy. Force projection, the ability to create a perfect physical illusion of yourself at a location light years away. An illusion so convincing that it fools everyone who sees it. An illusion that can interact with objects, that can hand someone a pair of dice, that can dodge and weave in a lightsaber duel. An illusion maintained across interstellar distances with enough concentration and power to sustain it for several minutes of real-time interaction. No Jedi in recorded history had ever done this before. The technique is referenced in the ancient Jedi texts, but no one had ever successfully performed it. Until Luke. The clues are planted throughout the confrontation. Luke appears younger than he should. His hair is darker. His beard is trimmed. He is using a lightsaber that was destroyed earlier in the film. Anakin's blue blade, a weapon that no longer exists. His feet do not disturb the salt layer on the surface of Crate, leaving no red footprints where every other movement on the planet does. He is not there. He was never there. But the projection is so perfect, so complete, so powered by such extraordinary force ability, that Kylo Ren swings his lightsaber through Luke's body and does not realize the truth until Luke has already accomplished his mission. The resistance escapes. The spark survives. And Luke Skywalker, alone on Ahsoka, the effort of the projection having drained every last reserve of his strength, looks at the twin suns setting over the ocean and becomes one with the Force. That death, those two suns, the echo of the boy on Tatooine who stared at the horizon and dreamed of something more. The circle closes. And it closes on the most powerful Force feat any Jedi has ever performed. But notice what Luke does not do. He does not fight Kylo Ren. He does not strike him down. He does not use the projection to deliver some overwhelming display of force power that destroys the First Order's army or collapses their walkers. He dodges, he weaves, he talks. He tells Kylo Ren that he has failed him and that he is sorry. He tells him that this is not going to go the way he thinks, and he tells him that if he strikes Luke down in anger, Luke will always be with him, just like his father. Those words are Luke's real weapon. Not the lightsaber, not the projection, the words, the acknowledgement of failure, the apology, the promise that even in death, even beyond death, the people who love you do not stop loving you. That is what Luke Skywalker learned in his years of exile on Ahsoka. Not a new force technique, not a new combat style. He learned that the legend of Luke Skywalker, the myth that he had spent decades trying to live up to, was not about the things he could do. It was about the things he chose to do. And on Crate, facing his nephew across a field of red salt, Luke chose to be what the galaxy needed. Not a warrior, not a weapon, a symbol, a spark, the hope that no matter how dark things get, someone will stand up. Someone will face the darkness. Someone will say, "This far and no further." And the resistance sees it. They see Luke Skywalker, legend of the rebellion, standing alone against the might of the First Order. And hope, the thing that Palpatine spent decades trying to extinguish, the thing that the Empire and the First Order were built to destroy, flares back to life. A stable boy on Canto Bight tells the story of Luke Skywalker to his friends. A spark ignites, and the First Order, for all its Star Destroyers and Walkers and Stormtroopers, cannot put it out. Because you cannot kill a legend, you cannot destroy hope, and you cannot defeat Luke Skywalker, because even death cannot stop him from being exactly who the galaxy needs him to be. Think about the scale of what Luke did. He projected himself across the galaxy. He maintained a physical illusion convincing enough to fool a powerful Force user in close combat. He did it while cut off from the Force for years, having only just reconnected. He did it knowing it would kill him. And he did it not to defeat his enemy, but to save his friends. That is the kind of power that transcends rankings. That is the kind of power that the Jedi Order, in all its centuries of existence, never even theorized was possible. Luke Skywalker as a Force ghost continues to demonstrate extraordinary abilities. In The Rise of Skywalker, his ghost catches a lightsaber that Rey throws into a fire and lifts his old X-Wing out of the ocean on Ahsoka, an echo of Yoda's lesson on Dagobah decades earlier. A Force ghost interacting with the physical world on that scale is unprecedented. It suggests that Luke's power did not diminish in death. If anything, it grew. Luke Skywalker sits at the very top of this ranking. alongside only one other name. His combat skills, while not as technically refined as Mace Windu's, were sufficient to defeat Darth Vader in single combat. His Force abilities are the most spectacular in the canon. His journey, from farm boy to hero, to failure to legend, is the backbone of the entire saga, and his understanding of the Force, earned through suffering and failure rather than through training and doctrine, represents the highest expression of what a Jedi can be. But there is one name left, one Jedi who, by every metric the Force can measure, stands above everyone else who has ever lived. One Jedi whose power was not just extraordinary, but literally prophesied, written into the fabric of the Force itself before he was even born. The Chosen One. The boy from Tatooine who was born without a father, who carried more midi-chlorians in his blood than any being in recorded history, who was destined to bring balance to the Force, and instead brought it to its knees before finally, at the very end, fulfilling the prophecy that gave him life. Anakin Skywalker. There is a version of this ranking where Anakin Skywalker is not at the top. A version that measures power by feats accomplished, battles won, enemies defeated. In that version, Luke might take the crown, because Luke's Force projection on Crate is, as a single feat, more spectacular than anything Anakin ever did as a Jedi. Yoda might take it, because Yoda's 9 centuries of accumulated wisdom and power represent a body of work that Anakin's truncated career cannot match. Mace Windu might take it, because Windu defeated Sidious and Anakin never did, not until he was no longer a Jedi at all. But this ranking does not measure accomplished feats alone. It measures power, potential, the raw Force energy that flows through a being and defines the upper limit of what they could achieve. And by that measure, there is no contest. Anakin Skywalker is the most powerful Jedi who ever lived. The Force itself said so. Let us start with the numbers, because in Star Wars, they matter more than people think. Anakin Skywalker's midi-chlorian count is over 20,000. To put that in perspective, Yoda, who was the most powerful living Jedi at the time of Anakin's discovery, had a midi-chlorian count that Anakin exceeded. The boy from the slave quarters of Mos Espa, who had never heard of the Jedi Order, who had never held a lightsaber, who had never received a moment of Force training, had a higher midi-chlorian count than the 900-year-old Grand Master of the Order. Qui-Gon Jinn's reaction when he gets the blood test results is not surprise. It is awe. He has found the Chosen One, the being the prophecy spoke of, and the being is 9 years old and building droids in a junk shop. The Chosen One prophecy stated that a being would be born of the Force itself, conceived without a father, and would bring balance to the Force by destroying the Sith. Anakin was born without a father. His mother, Shmi Skywalker, confirmed that there was no father. The implication, never stated outright in the films but confirmed by George Lucas in interviews, is that Anakin was conceived by the midi-chlorians themselves. The Force created him. He is not just strong in the Force, he is the Force's direct offspring, its chosen instrument, its weapon against the darkness. And the tragedy, the central tragedy of the Star Wars saga, is that this weapon was placed in the hands of an institution that had no idea how to wield it. The Jedi Order took Anakin Skywalker, the most powerful Force-sensitive being in history, and they failed him in every way an institution can fail a person. They took him too late. He was 9 when they found him. He had already formed attachments, already learned to love, already experienced fear and loss. The Jedi wanted a blank slate. They got a boy with a mother he adored and would eventually lose. They trained him in their ways, their rules, their detachment, and then they wondered why a boy raised in slavery, who loved too fiercely and feared too deeply, could not simply stop feeling. But the power, even within the constraints of his truncated Jedi career, the power Anakin displayed was beyond anything else the Order had seen. In the Clone Wars, Anakin's feats are consistently the most impressive of any Jedi shown in the series. His telekinesis is devastating, capable of hurling battle droids like toys and bringing down structures with a wave of his hand. His lightsaber combat is aggressive, overwhelming, a fusion of Form 5, Gem-So, with improvised techniques that no formal training could produce. Gem-So is the power form, the form that takes incoming attacks and turns them back against the attacker with overwhelming force. It rewards physical strength, relentless aggression, and the ability to maintain an offensive onslaught that never lets the opponent breathe. Anakin was its perfect practitioner. His strikes were so heavy and so fast that opponents described facing him as standing in front of a flood. You could not redirect it. You could only try to survive it. In the Clone Wars series, Anakin's combat trajectory is one of constant escalation. In the early seasons, he fights Asajj Ventress and holds his own. By the middle seasons, he is fighting Count Dooku and pushing him to the limit. He fights General Grievous and overpowers the cyborg's four-armed lightsaber assault. He cuts through armies of battle droids with an ease that borders on contempt. In the Season 1 episode, Storm over Ryloth, which aired on February 27, 2009, Anakin leads a starfighter assault against a separatist blockade and demonstrates the kind of reckless brilliance that defines his character. He is not just brave, he is audacious. He does things that no sane pilot would attempt and succeeds through a combination of force-enhanced reflexes and the absolute refusal to consider the possibility of failure. On the planet Meridoon, during the Season 1 episode Jedi Crash, Anakin sustains severe injuries from an explosion, but still manages to use the Force to push through, fighting beyond what his body should allow. Even diminished, he is more dangerous than most Jedi at their peak. But the defining combat moment of Anakin's Jedi career comes at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, the duel with Count Dooku aboard the Separatist flagship Invisible Hand. This is their third lightsaber encounter. In Attack of the Clones, Dooku defeated Anakin easily, severing his arm. In the Clone Wars, they fought multiple times with mixed results. But aboard the Invisible Hand, something has changed. Anakin has changed. The boy who charged Dooku with reckless fury on Geonosis has been replaced by something far more controlled and far more dangerous. The fight begins with Anakin and Obi-Wan working in tandem against Dooku. Dooku, a master of Makashi, the elegant dueling form, counters their initial attacks with the precision and economy that define his style. But Anakin and Obi-Wan switch to their primary forms, Jem-So and Soresu, and the dynamic shifts. Dooku uses the Force to push Obi-Wan away, slamming him into a wall and burying him under debris. And then it is Anakin alone against the Count. What follows is a masterclass in controlled aggression. Anakin channels the dark side, lets anger flow into his strikes, and the tempo of the fight changes completely. Dooku's Makashi is built for precision, for elegant ripostes and surgical strikes. It is not built to withstand the kind of relentless, hammering assault that Anakin unleashes. Dooku's face changes from confidence to concern to fear. He cannot block fast enough. He cannot redirect the force of Anakin's blows. Anakin batters through his guard, cuts off both of his hands, catches Dooku's falling lightsaber, and holds both blades crossed at Dooku's throat. That moment, two lightsabers, scissors at the neck, and Palpatine's voice, soft and reasonable, saying the word, "Do it." Anakin hesitates. He knows it is not the Jedi way. Dooku is unarmed, defenseless. Killing him now would be an execution, not a battle. But Palpatine pushes, and Anakin, the boy who has been listening to this man's counsel for over a decade, who trusts him more than he trusts the Jedi Council, closes the scissors. Dooku's head hits the floor, and Anakin Skywalker takes another step toward Darth Vader. The defeat of Dooku is significant to this ranking because Dooku was himself one of the most formidable duelists in the galaxy, a former Jedi Master trained by Yoda, a Sith Lord who had defeated Obi-Wan and Anakin simultaneously just 3 years earlier, and Anakin dismantled him, not through luck, not through a trick, through sheer power and skill that had grown beyond anything Dooku could match. And that progression, from the boy who lost his arm on Geonosis to the warrior who decapitated a Sith Lord on the Invisible Hand, is the clearest single illustration of how rapidly Anakin's power was growing during the Clone Wars. He was getting stronger, every day, every battle, every moment, and there was no ceiling in sight. But the moment that proves Anakin's power beyond all doubt comes in the Mortis arc, Season 3 of the Clone Wars, Episodes 15, 16, and 17. Overlords, Altar of Mortis, and Ghosts of Mortis. These episodes, which aired in late January and early February of 2011, take Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka to a realm that exists outside normal space, a place called Mortis, where the Force itself is embodied in three beings: the Father, the Son, the Daughter. The Father represents balance. The Son represents the dark side. The daughter represents the light side. They are, essentially, gods. Force entities of such power that they dwarf anything the Jedi Order has ever encountered. And the father brings Anakin to Mortis because he believes only the Chosen One has the power to replace him. Only Anakin can maintain the balance between the son and the daughter after the father dies. And to test this, the father orchestrates a confrontation. The son and the daughter, light and dark, the two fundamental aspects of the Force, turn their power on Anakin simultaneously, and Anakin subdues them both. He raises his hands. The sky darkens. The symbols on the monastery begin to glow, and the son and the daughter, beings of godlike power, kneel before him. Let that sit for a moment. Anakin Skywalker forced the physical embodiments of the light side and the dark side of the Force to kneel. He overpowered the Force itself, not one aspect of it. Both, simultaneously. No other being in the history of Star Wars has ever demonstrated anything remotely comparable. This is not a Jedi trick. This is not a lightsaber technique. This is a display of raw Force power so far beyond the scale of anything else in the canon that it exists in a category by itself. The father wanted Anakin to stay on Mortis, to take his place as the keeper of balance. Anakin refused, because Anakin's defining characteristic, the one that the Jedi called a weakness and the narrative proves is both his greatest strength and his most devastating flaw, is that he cannot let go of the people he loves. He would not stay on Mortis because his friends needed him. He would not abandon Padme. He would not abandon Obi-Wan and Ahsoka. His attachments pulled him back to the war, back to the Republic, back to the path that would lead him to the dark side. And that is the essential tragedy of Anakin Skywalker. He had the power to be the keeper of cosmic balance. He had the power to stand between the light and the dark and hold them in equilibrium. He had the power to do what the prophecy said he would do, and he could not do it because the people he loved were in danger, and the Jedi Order had never taught him how to love without fear, and that fear became the lever that Palpatine used to turn him. Anakin's fall to the dark side is not a story about power corrupting. It is a story about power being insufficient. All the midi-chlorians in the galaxy could not save Padme. All the Force sensitivity in history could not give Anakin the one thing he needed, the assurance that the people he loved would not die. And when Palpatine offered him that assurance, offered him the dark side's power over death, Anakin took it, not because he was evil, not because he was weak, because he was human, because he loved someone and could not bear the thought of losing her. And the Jedi Order, which should have been equipped to guide someone through that fear, had spent 1,000 years teaching its members that the correct response to fear was to pretend it did not exist. Anakin Skywalker as a Jedi is the most powerful Force user in the history of the galaxy. His midi-chlorian count exceeds every other known being. His combat feats during the Clone Wars are the most impressive of any Jedi shown on screen. His display on Mortis, subduing the physical embodiments of the Force itself, is the single greatest demonstration of raw Force power in the entire canon. And his fall, his transformation into Darth Vader, does not erase those feats. It recontextualizes them. The same power that could kneel the son and the daughter could also choke a wife, slaughter children, and enforce a tyranny that lasted decades. Power without wisdom, power without peace, power without the ability to let go. And yet the prophecy was fulfilled. In the end, on the second Death Star, when Luke was dying at the Emperor's hands, Anakin Skywalker came back. Not Vader. Anakin, the boy from Tatooine. The boy who loved his mother, who loved Padme, who loved Obi-Wan, who loved Ahsoka. That boy reached through decades of darkness and rage and suffering and grabbed the Emperor and threw him into the reactor shaft and destroyed the Sith forever. In that moment, Anakin was not using the dark side. He was not using the light side. He was using something else. Something the Jedi and the Sith had both been searching for and neither had found. Balance. True balance. The power of the Chosen One, expressed not through domination or serenity, but through love. After his death on the second Death Star, Anakin Skywalker appears as a Force ghost. He stands alongside Obi-Wan and Yoda, looking at his son from beyond the veil of death. He is young again, the face before the mask, the man before the machine, and Luke sees him. Sees all three of them, the master who raised him, the master who trained him, and the father who saved him. 3 Force ghosts, 3 Jedi who died and refused to stay dead. 3 points of light in the darkness, standing at the edge of a celebration they made possible. Anakin's Force Ghost is the final confirmation of something that the saga hints at but never states directly. The dark side did not destroy Anakin Skywalker. It buried him. It covered him in armor and pain and anger and decades of suffering. But it did not destroy the part of him that the Force created. The Chosen One was always in there, beneath the mask, beneath the breathing apparatus, beneath the red blade and the black cape, and the voice that made entire star systems tremble. Anakin, the boy from Tatooine, the boy who built a pod racer from scrap metal and won a race that no human had ever won before. The boy who looked at Padme Amidala and asked her if she was an angel. That boy survived 23 years of hell and emerged at the end, in the last 3 minutes of Darth Vader's life, to do the one thing the prophecy always said he would do: destroy the Sith, bring balance to the Force, save his son, and die, finally, as himself. Anakin Skywalker is the most powerful Jedi who ever lived. His power was prophecy made flesh. His tragedy was that the institution meant to guide that power failed to understand it. And his redemption, accomplished in the last minutes of his life, was the fulfillment of everything the Force had intended for him since before he was born. He sits at the top of this ranking, alone, the Chosen One, the broken knight, the redeemed father, the proof that the Force, in its infinite complexity, cares about only one thing: balance. And that is the complete ranking. From Coleman Trebor, the council member who died in 3 seconds on Geonosis, to Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One who subdued the Force itself on Mortis. From the Jedi who barely survived, to the Jedi who could have reshaped the cosmos. The spectrum of power within the Jedi Order is vast, and every point on that spectrum tells you something about what the Order valued, what it missed, and what it could not control. Take a step back now. Look at the pattern. The lowest-ranked Jedi on this list were still extraordinary beings. People who could move objects with their minds, who could sense danger before it arrived, who could wield a weapon of pure energy with skill that most beings in the galaxy could not comprehend. Coleman Trebor, Ajan Kolar, Saesee Tiin. They were Jedi Masters, council members, and they died in seconds. Not because they were weak, but because the threats they faced were operating on a level that their training had not prepared them for. The floor of Jedi power is still breathtaking by any normal standard, but the floor does not protect you from Darth Sidious. The middle tier, the Luminarias and the Plo Koons and the ki-adi-mundis and the Quinlan Voses, these were the backbone of the Order. The warriors and diplomats and teachers who kept the Republic stable for 1,000 years. They were powerful enough to shape battles, wise enough, in most cases, to lead armies, and blind enough, in almost every case, to miss the catastrophe unfolding around them. The middle of this ranking is populated by Jedi who were excellent at everything the Order asked of them, and completely unprepared for the one thing the Order refused to acknowledge: that the darkness was not outside the gates. It was inside the building. It had been inside the building the entire time, sitting in the Chancellor's chair, smiling. The upper tier is where the Jedi start to break free from the Order's limitations. Ahsoka, who left the Order and found a deeper connection to the Force on her own terms. Obi-Wan, who mastered Soresu to such a degree that he could defeat the Chosen One himself, and then spent 2 decades learning to let go of everything he had ever loved. Rey, who channeled the collective strength of every Jedi who had ever lived to destroy the most powerful Sith Lord in history. Mace Windu, who walked the edge between light and dark with a discipline that bordered on the superhuman and stood over a disarmed Palpatine with a blade at his throat. These Jedi did not just possess power, they wielded it in ways that changed the course of history. And at the very top, the 3 who stood apart: Yoda, Luke, and Anakin. 900 years of wisdom, a projection across the galaxy, a boy who brought gods to their knees. They represent something that transcends ranking entirely. They represent the question that the Star Wars saga has been asking since 1977. What is power for? The Jedi Order said power was for service, for peace, for the protection of the galaxy. And the Order was right about that. But the Order was also wrong about how to achieve it. It taught its members to suppress their emotions, to deny their attachments, to treat love as a weakness. And in doing so, it created the conditions for its own destruction. The most powerful Jedi who ever lived fell to the dark side, not because of his power, but because of his fear. And the Jedi who could have helped him navigate that fear had been trained to pretend fear did not exist. Look at the Jedi who achieved the most on this list. Really look at them. Qui-Gon Jinn discovered immortality by listening to the living Force when the Council told him to focus elsewhere. Kanan Jarrus became a true Jedi Master, not through temple training, but through loving Hera and teaching Ezra and sacrificing himself so they could live. Ezra Bridger summoned creatures from the void of space, not through command, but through empathy. Luke threw away his lightsaber and saved his father not through combat, but through compassion. And Anakin, in his final moment, did not draw on the dark side or the light side. He reached into the place where a father loves his son and found the strength to do what needed to be done. The Jedi Order spent 1,000 years building a system designed to manage power. And the system worked, for a while. But the system could not account for the fact that the Force does not want to be managed. The Force is not a resource to be allocated. It is not a weapon to be aimed. It is not a discipline to be mastered through meditation and lightsaber forms. The Force is a relationship, and relationships, by their nature, require the one thing the Jedi Order was most afraid of: vulnerability, openness, the willingness to be changed by what you love. Every Jedi on this list, from the bottom to the top, had that potential. Every one of them could feel the Force flowing through them, connecting them to every living thing in the galaxy. And every one of them, to varying degrees, was told to suppress that connection, to maintain distance, to practice detachment, to be serene in the face of suffering and composed in the face of loss. And some of them managed it. Luminara Unduli managed it. Ki-adi-mundi managed it. They detached. They composed themselves. They followed the code. And they died. And their deaths accomplished nothing beyond the immediate tragedy of their loss. But the Jedi who refused to detach, the ones who loved fiercely and suffered for it, and kept going anyway, those are the ones who changed everything. Anakin's love for his son destroyed the Sith. Luke's love for his father redeemed the Chosen One. Obi-Wan's love for Anakin produced the mercy that echoed forward through decades and gave Vader the template for his own salvation. Kanan's love for his crew held back an inferno. Ahsoka's love for Anakin drove her to fight Vader on Malachor, to slash open his mask, to look into the eye of the thing her master had become, and refuse to walk away. That is the lesson of this ranking. Power without understanding is dangerous. Power without compassion is destructive. Power without the willingness to confront your own darkness, as Yoda finally learned to do in the depths of the Force, is incomplete. The Jedi who sit at the top of this list are not there because they could lift the heaviest objects or swing the fastest blades. They are there because, in their finest moments, they understood what the Force was actually asking of them. Not control, not suppression, not denial. Balance. The Force does not belong to the Jedi belong to the Force. And the Force, as every story in this saga eventually tells you, flows strongest not through the ones who try to hold it still, but through the ones who let it move through them. Through the ones who open their hands instead of closing them. Through the ones who choose love over power, even when power is all they have. That is the real ranking, not the midi-chlorian counts, not the lightsaber forms, not the telekinetic displays or the Force projections or the combat victories. The real ranking, the one that matters, is measured by a single question. When the moment came, when everything was on the line, when the Force needed them to do the hard thing, the impossible thing, the thing that could not be taught in any temple or learned from any holocron, did they answer? Anakin answered. In the end, at the very end, standing over the reactor shaft with the Emperor's lightning in his face and his son's screams in his ears, Anakin Skywalker answered. And the answer was not the dark side, and not the light side, and not any side at all. The answer was a father lifting a monster over his head and throwing it into the void because his son needed him. That is power. That is the kind of power that the Force was always meant to produce. And maybe, if you listen closely enough, if you quiet your mind and close your eyes and let the hum of the galaxy settle over you like a blanket, you can feel it too. Not the power of the Chosen One, not the wisdom of Yoda, not the discipline of Obi-Wan or the courage of Ahsoka or the sacrifice of Kanan. Something smaller, something quieter. The same thing that has been humming underneath every story we have ever told about these people in their galaxy far, far away. The Force. It is in everything. It is between everything. It binds the galaxy together, and it has been waiting, patiently, for as long as the stars have burned, for someone to stop trying to control